So I drop down to the road and I just start, I'm wearing my early morning camo, like the heavy stuff. I'm wearing way too much. I'm super hot. I've got a bag full of apples. And what's funny is at least two trucks drive by me and I'm just jogging down the road with my muzzle loader. I'm like, they don't even say hi. They're like, what's this guy's problem? And I'm just jogging, 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 jogging.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of The Wild Dispatch. My name's Robin, and I'm back with more human stories from the wild. Now, today we are doing something a little different. That's why it's a special episode. Not to say that any of the other episodes aren't special. I don't want to talk down on my other children. But this one is a little different. We are going to be splitting the podcasting universe into two parallel lines. It's pretty dramatic sounding, isn't it? I guess that's a pretty dramatic way of saying this is going to be a double release. Both an episode on The Wild Dispatch, but also on the Hunting Stories podcast with Michael. So I've been friends with Michael since I was a guest on his show, coming up to almost a year and a half ago now. And I think I say this in our conversation, but it was actually really that chat that inspired me to set up my podcast and go on this whole adventure myself. So, given that I already gave some of my time and shared some of my stories, I couldn't resist the opportunity of tapping Michael on the shoulder and just telling him that he owes me a few of his own. Michael's had some great outdoor adventures in the past few years. I've been lucky enough to be sent the occasional envy-inducing photograph of things that he's got up to, successes. And also, I mean, on top of that, he's had some amazing conversations, and I've heard a bunch of those that he's passed on. I figure while he's been busy digging up lots of other people's hunting stories, it's about time that he really rolled up his sleeves and shared some of his own. I also couldn't resist to throw in some of my own. Ones that I haven't actually told yet, so I'm excited to share those. I want to give a big thank you again to Michael for being a guest, and also for having the brain-bonkingly brilliant idea of suggesting a double release, something that wasn't even in my mind at the time. So it's a great idea. Thanks, Michael. I also want to say a big thank you to everyone listening. If you're new, if you're coming from the hunting story side of things, then I will just give you my pitch. If you're into the idea of hearing more wild stories from all kinds of folks from around the world, then be sure to follow The Wild Dispatch. Yeah, you can just jump in wherever you like to listen, tap that follow button, and I'll be there in your ears for all eternity. I'm sure you're probably already well aware of the Hunting Stories podcast. He's got a lot of traction already. But if not, then definitely head over and check it out. Give him a follow and listen to some of the many fantastic stories he has from all kinds of outdoorsmen and women from all over the place. But there's a whole variety of great stories, of which you actually hear some secondhand from Michael in this episode too. Right, it's time for me to stop waffling. Let's get on with the conversation with Michael. Here he is.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch!
You know, the way conversation flows.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple of stories that I haven't really told. I haven't really told yet. So, but I mean, as always, you know me. Like, I can talk the leg off a donkey. So, I like this is going to be a dual effort here. You just keep me honest, as they say. Like,
all right.
Okay, so I feel like we should just jump in, man.
You tell me, man. I'll follow your lead.
Michael, welcome. Hello.
Howdy. Nice to be here, Robin. You finally pinned me down and got me on here to record.
It has been a little while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
How long? I mean, we've been talking about this for months now, and you've been running around having all kinds of fun adventures.
So yeah, it's been a busy couple months for me, but I mean, you asked me to be a guest before I think you had actually even released any episodes, and I was like, sure. And then I just made you chase me for like 6 months. So I'm glad I finally get to get on here, man.
That's a good point. So I guess I'm probably like maybe close to 9 months in now. So that is a while. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is going to be episode in the 30s. But yeah, we've both been busy. We've both been running around doing stuff.
Absolutely.
But I guess one thing, it's been the first time we met. I got a little note here. Was maybe coming up to 18 months ago, something around that kind of time.
That adds up.
And that was through your podcast, right?
Correct. Through a mutual friend, Preston, with I'm drawing a blank on his
Mountain Physio.
what Mountain Physio. I was gonna say Mountain Tough, but I knew that wasn't it. But yeah, Mountain Physio. Preston over there introduced us.
Yeah, he did, and I think he's been a guest on both of our podcasts now.
Yep. Yeah, I remember recording with him when we wrapped up, and I was like, "Well, if you have anyone else that's got some good stories, let me know." And he was like, "I know exactly who you needed to talk to," and you were that man. And he did not, or you did not disappoint. I think you still hold the record for the longest episode on my podcast as far as full time, and I had to cut some out of it. I think maybe my 2023 elk recap, which was just a bunch of us having too many drinks and chatting, that one might be longer, but as far as one person, man, you hold the cake.
I don't know if that's a thing to be proud of. I feel like I might be a little bit embarrassed.
I still tell your stories. That's how I know someone told me some great stories, is outside of my podcast when I'm telling stories. Yours constantly come up, all of your adventures in South Africa. So thanks for coming on, man. And like I said, I owed you this, and I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to just, chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear all of your stuff as well. I mean, like, obviously we listened to your elk adventures. Congrats. I mean, I've said it before, like we've been messaging constantly, not constantly, but periodically. And I remember actually chatting with you whilst you were on that elk hunt before, and it being like very long and tough, and just like
Yep.
sending positive wishes and just really hoping that it was all going to come together, because like you definitely earned it. You're working hard for that thing, man. And then also, you just got back from Hawaii as well. What island was it?
Molokai. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is a not tourist island. They literally, anyone that sees you there goes, "What are you doing here?" Because obviously big white guys.
Yeah.
Everyone on Molokai looks like a Hawaiian islander. They're like, "What are you doing here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're hunting." They're like, "Oh yeah, kill them all," because there's 6,000 people on the island, but 40,000 deer.
Wow.
So they're a huge problem. Huge problem. In fact, it looks more like Africa than I would say Hawaii, because these animals have eaten everything. It's just red dirt from the ground and to as tall as they can reach, right?
Yeah.
So it's these canopied trees everywhere. There's no growth on the ground, which is a big problem, because when it rains, there's nothing to hold that water. There's no plants to hold that water in the ground. So it actually runs off and into the ocean.
Okay.
That red dirt is actually killing the coral reefs that are around the island, and really screwing up the ecosystem of the ocean around the Hawaiian Islands. So it's a big problem they're trying to figure out how to solve. So I'm doing my part, right? Going out there and putting a couple deer down.
Very honorable work that you're doing.
Yes.
In the nature of conservation.
It's for the fishies.
But I can imagine then, like from a visual point of view, it must be quite similar then. If you've got like a lot of runoff happening, you must get these like canyons in red earth,
Yep.
like running down, breaking away the earth, which is actually, you get a lot of that in South Africa as well. And it's a very classic, often quite nice to hunt through those, where you can kind of work your way through just a little, it's like a mini canyon, and just pop your head up every now and then and see what's on the other side.
Absolutely. There are canyons everywhere. I will say most of them, if you really got into a canyon, were so steep that you couldn't really just pop your head out.
Okay.
So
okay.
we didn't spend too much time in the bottom of them, but it sounded exactly like that, where they're just canyons everywhere, but they're just too tall. It's too tall to hunt through.
Okay. Maybe it's a slightly larger scale than some of the stuff that I was doing. One thing I should just check. I'm just looking and realize we just like started recording and shooting the shit, but I just should actually just look and see if my levels are actually good, because I don't want to be like a tiny Smurf voice.
Yeah.
I'm still learning. I need to. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so we should actually do a bit of an intro as well, I figure, because I mean, I guess we have. What do you think? We should maybe do a little bit of a like nutshell introduction of each of us, a little bit about us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first if you don't mind. Yeah. So hi everybody, Michael Scrogan here. I'm the host of the Hunting Stories podcast. just an average guy who started hunting, I don't know, 9 years ago at this point. Just fell in love with every part of it, just the hard work. Hiking with a weapon is what I did for most of it, but in the last couple of years, I've actually had a little bit of success. Fallen in love with archery. I still do go rifle hunting. And really, for me, it's about the adventure, meeting great people, and then sharing these stories. And of course, the amazing food that we get out of this. So just fell in love with it. Started a podcast about 2 years ago because at the time I knew more vegans than I did hunters. And I was like, I need to meet more people. And that's kind of why I started the podcast. Got to meet great people like Robin, and hopefully we can get out into the woods together this year together, man. But yeah, that's me. Just an average guy that loves telling hunting, or actually loves listening to hunting stories. So thank you guys for letting me join the podcast today. Robin, why don't you introduce yourself? I know your listeners already know. But we're going to co-release this thing. And so, the people that haven't already heard your episode, tell them who we're talking with.
That was a great intro, dude. Now the pressure's on.
Right.
Okay. So I'm Robin Warman. I'm British. A bit of a weird, I guess my identity is pretty splintered by these days. So I'm a British guy who lives in California. Actually, my wife is from South Africa.
Yeah.
So I guess really I started properly hunting only 5 or 6 years ago, and that was over in South Africa, of all places. It's like a bizarre way in which to start the whole hunting experience, but it was through discovering how much fun it is going off on missions, getting meat, putting it in the freezer, and then just discovering that and then bringing it back over to America, being here. And actually, I guess it was actually about a year ago to this day now, we now are American citizens. We got our passports.
Hey.
So yeah, it's official.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, exactly. So since getting that bug, which I well and truly got, hunting with a rifle first, but then also in the same way. I think we have quite similar stories in a way.
Yeah.
Just getting really into bow hunting, and it's just such an enormous challenge.
It is.
That was the kind of the process which we went through. So yeah, again, a lot of taking weapons for a walk happened for a number of years, a lot of hard learning, a lot of time spent out there, which was a good time anyway, maybe a little bit of frustration here and there.
Always.
Yeah, but now managing to meet a lot of good people and learn a lot of great lessons about the wild. So part of that journey, which I should probably even get to, is actually the process of setting up my own podcast as well, The Wild Dispatch. Yeah. And I actually have to say, going on your podcast about, I don't know, something like 18 months ago, was the thing that triggered in my mind how fun it is to just sit around chatting about the outdoors, adventures, getting up to mischief, and that kind of, I guess, what do they call it? Adult onset hunting obsession, which we both, which we both have. Yeah, so that's pretty much me in a nutshell, I'd say.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm glad that coming on my podcast kind of spurred this for you, because I've been listening to your podcast and it's a ton of fun. I think you toe a very fine line of just enjoying the stories, but also doing a lot. I do a fair amount of learning and asking really good questions to the people that come on. You have people that aren't just hunters on your podcast, so I'm honored that I was able to inspire you just even a little bit. But what you're doing is great.
Thanks, man. Likewise. I mean, I've been an avid follower since Preston. Dr. Preston Ward gave me a shout and was like, you need to tell this guy some stories.
That's funny. Yeah, I still need you to connect me with a few folks. That was I have these crazy trains of one person will introduce the next. So Preston was introduced, I want to say, by the folks at the Bow Hitch, because Preston had that crazy buffalo story.
Yes.
And he introduced you, and you had those crazy South African stories. And I know you've connected me with a couple folks, but I need to get in touch with Fred Hammer for sure, because you two sound just like you're having too much fun in the woods, and I'd love to talk with that guy.
Yeah, he's a busy man, but he is definitely full of good stories. I managed to tie him down for a couple of episodes early on, but I've been calling him for a long time now, trying to get him back. But he's, I think it's actually at this time of year now. I mean, it's coming into summer, which is prime hunting time in South Africa. So he's a very busy boy right now.
Yeah, you got to
Periodically,
think it's our spring, so it's got to be his fall, right? So that's when
exactly.
everything usually is hunting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's cooking over there, and periodically I get sent some insane pictures of giant animals that he's seen nearby. He knows just enough. He knows to send just enough to remind me of what I'm missing.
I believe it.
But yeah. So I would love to hear a little bit about you. I don't know how much you've spoken about your story. We don't have to go super deep, but I'd love to just hear a little bit about your process of, like, I know you kind of you said yourself you traveled around quite a lot, but did you like get fully into the outdoors? Like, I mean, you said you were around 30 when you first got into hunting, but were you outdoorsy before that?
Yeah. So I did the Boy Scouts as a kid.
Yeah.
My parents weren't really outdoorsy people, so it's not really something we did a lot of. My dad's a big like sit on the shore of a reservoir with a bobber line and just fish a little bit, but that's about the extent of the outdoors as I was growing up. Maybe a camping trip here or there.
Yeah.
But when I got into college, I just fell in love with the outdoors. I went to school in Boulder, Colorado, and I don't know if you've ever been there. It's a beautiful place, and you can be in the mountains pretty quickly. And so I would just get out there go for hikes, car camping. I didn't do much backpacking. We just drove to fun places and parked and then went out and adventured from there. But yeah, in college, it's probably a little bit more about the beer and the girls and the camping, but than anything else. But yeah, hunting was not on the. It wasn't something that I ever even thought about, like not once in my entire life until I was engaged with my wife and I was living in Washington at the time.
Okay.
And my brother-in-law lived out there. My father-in-law, who's from Canada, they they went on an annual elk hunting trip. And so my wife was like, "You should go with them." And I was like, "I'm not really interested, but if I'm going to be marrying into the family, sure. Why not?" So I was like, "All right, fellas, what do I got to do? Walk me through this." And they're like, "Nope." I'm like, "What? What do you mean no?" Turns out that their rule, which they later broke, and I called bullshit on for them, but it was if you're not in the family, you're not invited to the hunting camp. And I was like, "Well, I'm engaged to your sister." They're like, "Get married, we'll talk." So I was like, "Okay, well, what do I need to do to get ready for that?" I ended up getting married. Of course, that worked out just fine. Still, actually, this year will be our 10-year anniversary.
Okay, congrats.
So that's all I know about how long I've been hunting, right? Yeah, and so I was like, "What do I need?" Yeah, and they no, they didn't really tell me anything. I eventually had to figure out myself. I knew that I needed to get my hunter education and my license. Went with my father-in-law and got a muzzleloader because they did muzzleloader.
Okay.
The reason they did that was actually an accident. I think there were just too many hunters out there in the wild for a rifle. They never even considered archery, and so they went with muzzleloader. So I got my first muzzleloader, and in Washington, it's a pretty crazy thing because you can't use a sight, so open sights. It's got to be an open bore as well. So that's like where the black powder goes into the rifle.
Yeah.
And then the sabot goes in there, and then you use the ramrod and you shove it down to the end. But then there's a cap, and you put this cap on, and it has to be open to the elements where you put a blast cap. That's what the hammer hits, which then ignites the black powder and sends it off. And because that's all got to be open to the elements, you're in Washington. It's raining all the time.
Yeah.
So you find yourself just like holding these parts of your gun to try and make sure they don't get wet. Otherwise, you might get up on an elk, fire your gun, but with wet gunpowder, nothing's gonna happen. So it was interesting. I really enjoy shooting muzzleloaders. If you haven't, you feel like you're in the Civil War, and you fire this gun off, and there's just this huge plume of smoke, and you're like brushing it out of the way to try and see what you hit. It's a really cool experience. Sucks to clean the guns because it's a very dirty way to shoot, but it's very fun. Either way, got all the stuff I needed, camo and whatnot, and then headed out into the woods with my brother-in-law,
Yeah.
my father-in-law, and one of their close friends. It was my brother-in-law's friend Steven. They'd known each other since they were like 3, and at the time they were probably 35.
Wow.
So yeah. So yeah, it was a process. I kind of just started teaching myself everything.
Did you borrow a rifle, or was it like you were fully all in? You were just like, "I'm going all in. I'm getting this stuff."
Yeah, I was. Well, so if I borrowed, they didn't have an extra one, right?
Oh, okay.
So I couldn't borrow one. I probably would have.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but went out. I think my first season, it sucked. I didn't really like it. I enjoyed the camaraderie around camp. I loved hearing their stories, their jokes, and those things. but it was soaking wet. It was October in Washington. It was cold. They kept putting me in this field called Bear Field, and you could hear the bears. I never saw one, but I saw their scat, and I could hear them like chomping in the woods. And I'm like, this sucks. I don't know why anyone likes this. Just kind of scared, wet, and tired. It's really hard work. I wasn't prepared for how much work it was going to be.
Yeah.
But I was happy to be invited.
Did you?
And so then, go ahead.
I mean, you said that it was like a bit of a baptism of fire, or I guess of water would probably be the more appropriate term for Washington at that time of year.
Oh yeah.
So how long did you do that for? And did you have any? I mean, you said that you didn't see much at the beginning. Did you get some close encounters? Did you like have moments? Can you remember like the first time that you saw something or heard? Like, I mean, I don't know. Is it mating time? Is it the rut at that point, or have they already done it by then?
It's late rut. It's like the first week of October. So
Okay.
will something be rutting? Maybe, not necessarily. But the first year I didn't see any animals except for like my second to last evening. And we went to camp in the middle of the day, had some sandwiches, took some naps, woke up, had a beer or two, which you really shouldn't do. I don't recommend it, but at the time I didn't know any better. And then I walked myself right back out to Bear Field, found my spot. And the only animals I saw that entire trip, I remember waking up because I had fallen asleep in my spot, and there was like, I don't know, 8 does in front of me, like mule deer does, which I only had an elk tag. So I was just like, oh, that's cool to see. It's glad to know that there are animals out here. It's actually funny at the time I was asking the guys, I was like, how do I tell the difference between a mule deer and an elk? I have no idea. Like I didn't know what I would do if an animal showed up, and they're like, oh, you'll know. And I do know. It's pretty easy to tell once you've actually seen them both. But at the time, yeah, it was just it was just hanging with the boys, spending a couple days in the woods, not really doing anything in particular.
Yeah.
But the second year, when I was like, okay, let's go, I was like, that sucked, but let's go. It's fun, and I feel like I'm closer and more, a better part of the family here. So the next year, we actually drew a bull tag. So in Washington, you can get spike tags, and so we put in for a special unit, and we got it. And they were pissed because they had like we went in as a team, and everyone just like puts one name in the hat, and if one of us gets drawn, we all get drawn. But they had like 8 points and 7 points, and I had 1.
Yeah.
And I got my bull tag. But we went to a different unit that we had never hunted, and I mean, there's a lot to the story, but we did actually see elk that year. We got into elk. We killed 1 elk. I could tell that story if you'd like me to, but that was the moment that I knew I was hooked.
Yeah.
We had oh hell, I'll just tell the story.
Tell it.
Okay. So again, this is my second year of elk hunting. I don't even have a truck, right? So I'm driving a Volkswagen Tiguan, like not even the full size Volkswagen SUV, and I roll into the hills. I actually come in late, so camp's already set up. I just had to get off work. When we get out there, everyone's like, "So what's the plan?" And my father-in-law and brother-in-law got some. They call it a watering hole, but it's a dry watering hole. There's no real reason to sit it.
Okay.
But that's where they're gonna go. My other buddy and I are like, "Why don't we just walk out the back of the camp? There's no roads that direction. We'll just go." And so we just start walking the hills behind camp. So we're up at 4 a.m. We're walking, and nothing happens. So you wouldn't expect anything else to happen, being that ill prepared. But we go back to camp, and my buddy's like, "Okay, let's have a quick breakfast. Let's go check some of our cameras that we had put up there earlier in the year." So we fill our bag with apples because you can bait in Washington.
Okay.
So he somehow got a whole bunch of apples. Yeah, and so we're putting all these apples in our packs. And we drive, a couple miles to this entry point, cross this river, go up this mountain to where they decided they were going to put a camera. We get there, there's not a picture of anything on the cameras. Like, oh, that's a shame. But what we're doing now at this point is, and of course, because this is elk hunting 101, is we're pitching the apples to each other and we're batting them with a stick. So they basically just like disperse, right? So you wouldn't just like put a bunch of apples, just basically making applesauce baseball style. And so we're just, emptying our bags slowly, thinking not much is happening. Let's not worry about it. And then we hear an elk bugle, and it's probably like 8 a.m, 9 a.m, something like that. And we're like, well, it's too late in the year because it's October. We're like, it's too late in the day. Like that's not an elk. That's just some hunter out there trying to make something happen. Let's not worry about it. Let's just keep playing baseball. we just keep blasting these apples, and we're doing it, and then all of a sudden we hear just the bugling picks up, the pace picks up, where it's a bugle here, a bugle there, and a bugle here, and a bugle, and we're like, wait a minute, okay, one hunter couldn't possibly be bugle. Like, you'd have to catch your breath. They were just rapid fire bugles back and forth, and we're like, what the hell is going on here? So we basically stopped playing baseball, put our bats away, and just start running down our hillside. So we were running. We get down to the valley where there's like an old decrepit building, and then you got to cross the field, the river, and then our truck, and then the other hillside. And we look on the other hillside, and we just see a massive bull walk into an opening, rip a massive bugle, and then walk into the trees. And that's like the exact moment I was like, whoa, I'm like, this is cool. Like that's an elk. I'm not going to confuse that with a deer. And I was just like, this is awesome. Like, let's go. So now we got to run across this field, and we're actually running the opposite direction because our truck we had to cross the river. So we're running the wrong way,
Yeah.
cross down, jump the river, get to the truck. And my buddy just starts running up that hill. And, because of course, along with playing baseball when you're elk hunting, another good strategy is to try and outrun the elk, right? You're going to catch up to them. Another little caveat is I'd actually torn my Achilles, I want to say like 8 months before this.
Oh,
So I'm
no.
like pretty, like my legs are nowhere near where they should be. I'm just happy to be on my feet at this point, not on crutches, because I think I was on crutches for 6 months. And my buddy just starts running up this mountain. And remember, we got like 30 pounds of apples still in our backpack. So I'm running up with him, and I get maybe 150 yards up this hill. And I'm like, nope, like I can't do this. I just can't get it up this hill. It hurts. I'm not going to rupture my Achilles. It's too fresh. So I look at my buddy, and I'm like, good luck. I was like, I know that this is basically a finger ridge, and I think I could run flat for days. I just can't run uphill.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go down, and I'm going to swing around the mountain. If you push him up, maybe you'll push him over to me, because I'll probably be faster going around than you going up and over. So I drop down to the road, and I just start, I'm wearing my early morning camo, like the heavy stuff. I'm wearing way too much. I'm super hot. I've got a bag full of apples. And what's funny is at least 2 trucks drive by me, and I'm just jogging down the road with my muzzle loader. I'm like, they don't even say hi. They're like, what's this guy's problem? And I'm just jogging. So I get around, and I swing around, and I'm coming up on where I think I should be. And I hear, and I'm like, oh man, did my buddy just get one? Like,
Oh, you heard like a gunshot.
Yeah. I heard a muzzle drops down from the mountain that I just gone around and stops on the road right in front of me, like 80 yards. And I'm like, holy moly, look at that guy. I pull up my muzzle loader, and I realize directly behind him is a camp. The big wall tents specifically. It's like one of those really big Davis wall tents, like 20 by 30 wall tent. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe they're in there, maybe they're sleeping. I was like, I can't take that shot. So I just sort of look at this beautiful giant elk, to this day, probably the biggest elk I've ever seen in my life, just walk across the road and the other way out. So I then jog the 80 yards over to where he was. I'm looking into the trees to see, hey, do I see him? Now there's nothing behind him. Maybe I can shoot him, but there's nothing there. And then I hear something behind me. So I turn around and I look up the hill that he had just come down from, and there's another elk. And I'm like, oh, all right. So this is about 65 yards uphill, pretty steep angle.
Yeah.
But I pull my muzzleloader up, center it on the bull, and fire, smoke everywhere. I don't see anything. Knocking the smoke down, trying to make it so I could see the elk's not there anymore. So the only thing they told me, like the only bit of hunting advice, it was, if you shoot, reload your muzzleloader.
Yes, yeah.
So I then, get my little box, my little waterproof box with my black powder and all the different materials, and I open it and drop the entire thing in a ditch on the side of the road. So now I'm like on the ground, like pawing through the grass, trying to find the right amount of black powder, trying to find my sabots and my blast caps. Again, trucks are driving by me. Like, they're not questioning anything. They're just, this panicked child on the side of the road, just like trying to figure they didn't say hi. They didn't do anything. They just drove right by, which is so weird to me now that I think about it. But either way, got it loaded, and I just ran straight up the hill. And I don't know how long, it seems like it was 10 seconds, but it had to be longer than that. Either way, I get to the top of the hill, and I hear someone yell. Because again, elk hunting 101, as soon as you shoot something, you're supposed to scream through the woods. Like, that's right. We're really killing it at this point.
Yeah.
And it's my brother-in-law. So as it turns out, he was about a mile north of there, but they heard the bugling too. So he had started in, and about half a mile towards where they were going, he took his dad and was like, "Dad, sit here. Don't move. I'm going to drop a pin." And his dad's not hunting. His dad's just coming along. So he leaves him in the woods, says, "Here's the stump," drops an Onyx pin on him, and just leaves him and says, "I'm going to run these elk down."
Okay.
Again, another one of my friends think they can outrun an elk. Either way, funny thing about that is my father-in-law, who was sitting there, had like 5 videos of like herds of elk just walking by at 20 yards, like just elk. The entire time my brother-in-law was gone, elk were passing my father-in-law's. He was just sitting on a stump with no weapon. Either way, it's fine because my brother-in-law ran in, and what he did was when he got there, he realized all of a sudden that he was in the midst of all of these elk. So he just sat down and said, "I'm going to sit here and wait for an opportunity." And he says there were 20, 30 elk. There was a lot of commotion. Obviously, with all the bugling, there was a lot of commotion.
Yeah.
He got an elk to stop at about, he says, 5 to 10 yards, broadside, and that was the first shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my other buddy, who knows where he is at this point, right? Still climbing the other side of the hill, I guess. I don't really know. But so I hear him yell my brother-in-law yell through the woods, "Hey, who's shooting?" And I'm like, I recognize his voice. I'm like, "Dylan, it's me. I shot an elk." And he's like, "I did too." And we're like, "Yeah." He's like, "I have no idea where mine went." And I'm like, "Well, I'm standing where mine was. Come to me." And so he comes to me. So we hollering at each other through the woods until we find each other. We're standing on this game trail again, about 70 yards up this hillside, and I'm looking down the game trail, and there's an elk, and I'm like, "Oh," "He's got a wound." I was like, "There's the elk," and then I noticed there's 2 wounds on this elk.
What?
So as it turns out, my brother-in-law hit it broadside 5 to 10 yards. We're talking 50 caliber muzzleloader.
Yeah.
Liquefied its heart. And then it was just standing there, basically dying when I shot it, and I shot it lung spine from the angle below, right?
Yeah.
And it ran 40 yards down that road, and then it just slowly expired. It was on its feet for another 30 to 40 minutes. It was absolutely crazy. I should have shot it again, thinking about it. But my brother-in-law came, and he sat next to me, and we just sat there and looked at it, and he's like, "Oh, crap. I left Dad in the woods." So he's like, "You watch this, make sure it doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to go back and get my dad." And so he runs off, and I'm like, "Okay, well, now I've got this elk. I've got no idea what to do." And then eventually my other buddy, who's probably the only one with any experience, he's from Texas. He knows a lot about whitetail hunting. And he's killed a couple of elk, but he shows up, the elk dies, and we walk over to it and start to, process it. And eventually my brother-in-law and father-in-law come back. We managed to get this thing gutted. And what's funny, like I said, there's that camp, right?
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
So we're standing on this hillside, and those guys come back from their morning hunt. And they're like, "What are you boys doing up there?" They're like, "Oh, we shot an elk." They're like, "You shot an elk in our camp?" And I'm like, "Almost. I almost did." But no. And so these guys come up, take a look at the elk, and it's a beautiful elk. Probably, I don't know if my brother-in-law ever measured it, probably a 300+ inch bull.
Wow.
But what's amazing is my father-in-law went and got the truck, drove it up to that hill, backed it in, and we slid the elk full down that hill into the truck, like with 6 guys, just whoop right in. Easiest pack out ever. But from that point on, man, I was absolutely hooked. I got some meat, of course, but I didn't keep the antlers. In retrospect, I think the person who puts it down the last shot should get to keep the antlers. That's my perspective. So, but yeah, that was the moment that I just knew, like, hunting was for me. We went back to the other spot the next few years and didn't really have any luck, and it was never really the same experience. But then when I moved to Colorado, I started researching, because I was like, all the stuff that they had done as far as finding locations now needed to be done again in Colorado.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with the entire process of like researching the animals, of researching the locations and why they might be there, and scouting and cameras. And all of a sudden I was spending way more time in the woods, and I love everything about it. And my wife loves some of the things about that, but
okay.
But yeah, so that's the story of my first elk and kind of what got me into hunting. So
that's
like
a great story.
I didn't really have any interest in it until I had fully experienced it. In fact, the only reason I said yes initially was because, when guys turn 30, they either get really into like history or smoking meats. And so I was into smoking meats, and I was like, "Oh, if I'm going to smoke all these ribs, I should probably kill an animal at some point." And so that's kind of why I said yes, man. And yeah, here we are now. I've, harvested a bunch of animals. My freezer's full right now. I got 3 tags, maybe 4 for this year. So it's my personality now.
Good times.
Yeah.
I love that. I can definitely relate. The whole kind of figuring stuff out when you're new is so hard, isn't it? And like, you're definitely, I don't know what the expression is. You are out in the woods with no idea what's going on. And it's like, yeah, it takes a lot of time to get a bit of an intuition, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that that barrier to entry existed for not just myself.
Oh God, it was tough. What's funny is like hunting with those guys in Washington for all those years. Not once did anyone ever say the term thermals. And if you've ever hunted Western big game,
Yeah.
it's like the number one thing you need to be aware of. It's the prevailing winds that based on the temperature of the ground, the wind is either always going uphill or downhill.
Yeah.
Always. And we never once worried about it, not once. So when I started researching in Colorado, I was like, why did we not pay attention to this? We might have killed a lot of stuff if we were always thinking back to hunting Washington, always in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
The thermals were always wrong for what we were doing. So we got lucky is what we did.
Exactly. Your buddy like chasing up the hill at that time of day going like, oh, let's go up here. I'm wondering if it's that kind of time when the heat starts going up the hill. It's like
Exactly. I guarantee it. I remember how hot it was. I'm sure the thermals were going just right up his back, up the hill. So
I guess when was the moment that you decided to pick up a bow? Like what happened with that? Like because you were using muzzle loader and running around and getting like that's the moment that you really saw red, I guess, like got into hunting.
yeah.
But was it like a mentor or a friend or who was it that kind of got you into it?
This is not a big, cool, romantic answer to that question. So I went to Colorado trying to figure out how to get a tag. Muzzleloader wasn't necessarily an option. It wasn't like Washington, just totally different systems. So I bought my first like rifle, went rifle hunting in mid-November in Colorado up by the Wyoming border, and was so damn cold and miserable that I was like, nope. I don't want to do this anymore. So I was like, what are other options? And I was like, oh, there's over-the-counter archery. I should get a bow, and then I can hunt in September.
Yeah.
And that's it, man. It was the weather. The weather is why I did it, because I was like, I'd like to experience that bugling, that ruddy, crazy September elk hunt. I've got a taste of it a little bit, but mainly I just didn't want to be in a snowstorm. Like that was it. Which is actually funny that's what drew me to it. And I ended up falling completely in love with archery, but I still go on that November hunt. Like every year I go and I suffer. Like I think the year that I officially decided I was going to archery hunt, the high for the entire week that we were there, and this is midday, was 20 degrees. Like the highest temperature of the entire week was 20 degrees during a midday, one of the days. Otherwise, it was just so cold. It's so cold. So that's why. So it's just complete random luck. So same thing. Very crazy learning curve. I didn't have anyone to go to and say, how do I do this? I just started watching YouTube. So there's sources out there for people, but that was a struggle too.
Yeah.
I made a lot of mistakes in archery. Like my arrows were not spined correctly. All sorts of different things that were making me just a really bad archer. And that's probably why it took like 5 years to get my first archery kill.
But you're also a pretty big guy, right? I'm guessing you got a pretty long draw. So that then spine is even more important.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny is I didn't know that I was shooting the wrong spine until I went to a really good archery shop here in Denver. And I bought a new bow, and then I showed them my arrows. They're like, no, you can't shoot those out of this. They're like, we're not going to let you destroy this brand new, beautiful bow. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so they explained the science behind it. I went, sure, you're just trying to upsell me some arrows.
Classic.
Went back home, started Googling these things and looking it up. And I was like, oh no, they're actually saving my life. Like my bow could explode because my arrows are not stiff enough.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy to think that that's something you need to worry about, but yeah.
I'm curious then, like the bow hunting thing became an addiction. What made you shift over to Texas? Because like, I mean, like, and also like Texas versus Colorado, like what's the hunting like over there? Because you spent time over in Texas, right? You were there for a while.
Yeah. Texas is different, right? So what's crazy is there's, I think 10 to 20 times the amount of public land in Colorado than there is in Texas.
Wow.
So Texas is, 10, 15 times larger than the state of Colorado, but it's all private. So the reason we went down there was actually because my father-in-law, who again was one of the first guys I ever hunted with, he got really sick. So we moved down there 2 separate times to basically spend more time with him, get him so that he could actually meet our children. So now I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. He's met them both. We didn't think he'd meet either one of them, which was great. He has passed away at this time. In fact, for the people listening, I did a in memory of him. You'll hear that exact same story, but with the other guys that were on that hunt,
Okay.
and a couple other fun stories. If you haven't heard that one, it's the Larry Peterson episode. It's one of my favorites. Um, where
Oh,
was I? Oh yes, going to Texas. It was very different because I couldn't find access. I couldn't get on land. To just go hunting. So I ended up finding a couple loopholes. Like at the time, rivers in Texas were public land,
okay.
and you were allowed to hunt them, but only with a shotgun. So the only whitetail I've ever killed, I went down to a really good deer area, found a river, and just started walking down it with my shotgun. They just have to be navigable, which doesn't mean water. It just means like an average of 30 feet wide, which, yeah, no problem. Easy to find that. So I would just start walking rivers and hunting them. And I did shoot a really nice, probably 130-inch whitetail buck. Complete luck, right? I'm just sort of, I don't have any options. I just walk down the river until something shows up. And I got lucky that one particular time.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been hog hunting a bunch of times. I've actually never killed a hog. They just never seem to show up. I've been on hog hunts where as a group, we kill 30,
Wow.
but I didn't even see one. Another guy killed 15.
Really?
So yeah, it's just, that's why it's hunting, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when it comes to Texas versus Colorado, you can go out. You're always going to have a place to hunt.
Yeah.
And that's why I think public land is really important. In fact, I'd write senators in Colorado and they love public lands. Write senators in Texas, they're like, nope, there shouldn't be public lands. Ted Cruz specifically. I was like, screw that guy, man. He just has no interest in people having public land and that he wants to sell it all off. Either way, yeah, and that's the main difference. So I've always been an opportunity hunter, not so much an archery hunter. So like I'll take whatever weapon I can with me to try and fill my freezer.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of fun doing that. I have more fun doing that with the archery equipment personally, but I'll do it with whatever. But yeah, Texas is, if you know someone with land, it's great. There's so many animals and there's all sorts of critters. You got hogs, you got axis deer, whitetail deer, there's mule deer, there's nilgai, there's everything you can possibly imagine in Texas. I mean, you can go shoot a zebra if you can find one. Elk are considered an invasive species in Texas.
Oh, really?
So if you run into an elk, you can shoot it in the middle of the night out of a helicopter if you wanted to. Like there's no rules. And there's Aoudad, which are these crazy rams from Afghanistan. There's all sorts of crazy fun things in Texas, but you have to know someone who has land,
Yeah, that's the
or
tricky
pay
thing.
for a lease or pay for a guide. So Texas is wonderful. I love it, but I definitely struggled. I didn't hunt nearly as much as I thought I would in Texas.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've not made it over there, but it is true. And I think in a funny way, it's quite similar in South Africa as well.
Yeah.
And actually, in a weird way, from what I hear, Texas looks quite a lot like South Africa in places too. At least the areas
bet.
where I've hunted, lots of kind of like bushy, hot, everything's spiky, trying to. Yeah, they say that everything's trying to bite you, even if it's the plants. But
Yep.
yeah,
That's
so
Texas.
yeah, it's definitely not somewhere I've gone. I'd be curious to go, but obviously you've got to have those contacts, and I don't have those right now.
Yeah, I've got one buddy who is like a friend of a friend who has a ranch out deep West Texas, which is not necessarily the funnest place to go, and you don't want to go out there in July and August. But other than that, I don't really have any contacts out there. So I bought a house out there, 15, 20 deer in my yard at any given moment, but I couldn't do anything about it, due to other regulations about how much land before you're allowed to hunt it and stuff
Oh,
like
really?
that.
Is there
So
rules about that? Oh, okay.
Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful place and tons of fun animals, and I encourage everyone to go out there and try their best to hunt in Texas. It's also different because you sit in a blind, right? Which is a total different game than Western big game where you're stomping around doing 12 miles a day. So it's very different, but it's still very fun.
Mm. I mean, it always looks fun, wasn't it? Like a new area, trying out new stuff,
Yeah.
new quarry, I guess is the term. It's always a fun thing. I'm wondering, like, I wrote down a few little questions before this chat, things that I was just curious about. Like,
Okay.
you've got a great concept for a podcast. Like, I mean, you can tell, like, you've obviously got a bunch of great stories from like the hunting world. It's such an infectious kind of thing. It's so just fun to hear people recount their stories. And I figure,
Yeah.
I'm sure people have been doing it since the beginning of time, right? Like it's one of the main focuses of mankind.
Right? Cave dwellings always had the hunt.
Yeah,
pictured
exactly.
on the walls. So.
They're not drawing about other stuff, are they? That's the thing. That's the main focus. The time that there was like a bajillion animals all around.
Yep.
So I guess like, was there a moment when you had the idea to do a podcast about hunting stories? Was there?
It was like three moments. I went to do you know Elk Shape, Dan Staten?
Yeah, yeah.
I went to his elk hunting camp in Texas. And I was there, and we did the working out, and that sucked, and the shooting, and he does a very good job of kicking your ass and making you realize you're not in good enough shape to elk hunt, or you have a lot of stuff to work on. But one thing, a portion of his camp was like side hustles. You make money so you can make opportunity, get tags, and those things. And I was like, okay, that's smart. But I was thinking about it a little differently. Like, I don't know if I need a side hustle necessarily,
Yeah.
but it helped me realize that, like, what am I lacking? And that was, I don't know any hunters,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
like I go to these events to meet people, to make friends in Texas more than anything is why I went to it. Not necessarily because I thought I'd get a ton of knowledge from the thing, because I've done so much research in my life. And I was like, okay, I want to meet people. How do I meet people? And so that was kind of the first thing that happened. So then I'm driving actually from Texas to Colorado. It's turkey season, and I'm listening to Chris Rose and I'm drawing a blank on the other gentleman's name. Maybe I'll remember it, but they put together a turkey hunting series for Miriam turkeys specifically, and it's 9 episodes. Each episode is an hour to an hour and a half. And so I'm like episode 7. Like I'm 10 hours deep in turkey hunting, and I'm looking at the road in West Texas being like, this is awful. I can't listen to why turkeys gobble anymore. I can't listen to why they roost in this tree and you need to get up at 3 a.m. and gobble to try and find. I was like, no, I don't want to learn anything. I just want to hear a fun story. Like, I just want to hear stories. I just want to be entertained. I want to stay in the hunting vein, but I just want to hear stories.
Yeah.
That's all I want. I don't want to learn anything. And so I started looking online, and I was like, nothing's here. There's like maybe one other podcast that's specific to it, but they put out one episode a year or something like that. It's like a group of podcasts that's just one that they don't really pay attention to.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, so there's an opportunity here. And I was like, but I really don't want to be on podcasts. Like, that doesn't sound good to me. So I just sort of put that. So that's moment number 2, where I was like, that's when the idea happened. And then a friend of mine came into town from Washington, and we're sitting there having a beer on the back patio. And he goes like, so, any business ideas? What do you got going on in your brain? Anything you've been thinking about doing? And I was like, thank you for asking. Actually, yeah, I thought about starting a podcast. And he's like, well, about what? And I explained it to him, and he's not a hunter. And he's like, well, it seems to make sense if you didn't find any other ones that were doing it. It's something that you would listen to. He's like, you should try it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? There's my side hustle right there. And so you put those 3 moments together, which is probably over the course of 3 to 4 weeks. And I just started reaching out to hunters on Instagram, being like, hey, I'm starting this podcast. Would you like to come share some stories? And I realized I had something when no one said no.
Yeah.
Everybody, every single hunter, like regardless of where they are, where I felt they fit into the chain of, like who's a big deal in the industry, every single person was like, yeah, no, I'd love to. That'd be awesome. I'd love to tell some stories. And here I am 2 years into this thing, and I still get that attitude from people all over the industry, like people that maybe they are known for their e-scouting and maps. And they're like, I would love to come on and not talk about e-scouting and maps and tell you my favorite stories. Or people that are CEOs of companies. They're like, yeah, I would love to come on and not talk about my products, but instead just tell you my favorite hunting stories. Like, it's different. And I would say almost every time I do a podcast, the people reach out to me afterwards and go, oh man, I just thought of 3 more stories. I need to get back on the podcast. So I think you said it, you had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You realized how fun it can be. I have a great time doing it. And I think that most of my guests, I think that maybe is what makes my podcast maybe a little bit different than most, is that like the people aren't doing it to push any agenda. They're just there to tell their favorite stories. They're just having fun, and it's going well.
I mean, I believe it. It's so true, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that's the thing. People get a chance to tell the stuff that's been their world for so long. And there's you're right, no agenda, no like trying to sell something or trying to push something specifically. And that's just free, isn't it? It's free. It's just people having a laugh, entertaining each other, telling stories which have been entertaining people since the beginning of time, I'm sure. So
100%, man. Absolutely.
I've got to agree, though. I think it was really nice when I started the pod as well. People are super open and usually really helpful. People who I would never imagine were going to like get back to me.
Yeah, right.
But I guess the thing is, you just got to try, right? You've just got to try and see what happens, and that's the thing. So I guess like you must have had like, I mean, I know for a fact. This is a bit of a leading question. I already know the answer.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Well, you had all these amazing conversations with pretty incredible people who are like super talented in the hunting world and have some great stories. But then obviously a product of that is that you're meeting people, and your whole goal, your whole reason for setting this thing up is beginning to pay off, right? And you're having these very cool experiences, going off on adventures. I mean, I'm sure there's been far more than the ones that I'm saying now, but like a big one that popped in on my radar was like when you called me up and like, hey, I'm going to hunt. I'm going to go hunt elk with a champion elk caller.
Right?
I was like, what?
Yeah. That was fun, man. Jermaine Hodge. What's funny is we just had a great time. He held the record for the longest episode before I met you, right?
Oh.
He was like episode 6. And we had a few too many beers, and we talked, and like we were on the phone for, I want to say, like 4.5 to 5 hours. We recorded like a 3-hour episode.
Wow.
But we just kept talking. He was walking me around his house, showing me his taxidermy, and I mentioned to him what unit I put in for that I didn't get, and he's like, "That's my secret unit." And next thing you know, I'm like, he mentions, if I draw it next year, I'll take you. I mean, I wrote that down. I'm like,
amazing.
I am not gonna forget that. So, and the next year, I said, hey, we had a couple drinks, so I'm not gonna hold you to it, but I do want to remind that you said this. And he was like, no, let's go. If you get that tag, I'd love to go out with you. And that's just who Jermaine is. As it turns out, it's not abnormal for him to take people out.
Okay.
I might have been the first person he'd never met before that he took out, but like he's constantly taking people out, and like he loves to get people on elk as much as he likes to get them himself. I think last season he had his hands on at least like 15 different animals going down.
Wow.
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy. I mean, he's a great guy and an amazing hunter, and he's in way too good of a shape because he's like 5'6", I'm 6'4". And I'm not in good shape, and he's basically a professional athlete. Trying to keep up with him in the mountains was awful. That's why when you said we were texting the whole time, and it sounded like I was gassed, it's because I was following Jermaine everywhere.
There was a tone in your voice at times, just sounding like I don't know. Broken was maybe an overstatement, but you're just like, man, this is sad. This is really savage. That I could see like you hadn't quite seen the light at the end of the day. You were working super hard, and I don't think you'd had that many opportunities at that point. So it was just like, is this going to happen? And I know it can be hard to visualize, can't it? Where you like can't imagine for it to work out until you get to that point where you suddenly get an opportunity. But like, how many days was it before you even got on like a good chance?
So I went out a couple days with Jermaine. Couldn't make it the first couple days because of work. He was in Philadelphia. So I went out with his friend, Pat Luttrell, and Pat had literally a month before won the men's division, not the professional division, but the men's division World Elk Calling Championship. And he won it again this year. So I'm in good hands, right?
Yeah.
And so I go out with Pat and my buddy Jared, and we saw elk, but we never really had an opportunity. I actually have a video that went viral of me looking like an idiot in a field. It's got like 2 million views because I'm stalking right, and there's an elk right behind me, and they're like, oh no, turn around. So like I was stalking a bull, not a great bull, but I was stalking him for a couple hours, and they were just on a hill watching me do it. So never drew my bow back, never really got within range, and a moose ended up blowing the whole thing. Not even me. I blew that one cow out. But a moose came and blew the rest of everything else out, which is where I got that moose tag, Robin, which we need to go talk about.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Where was I with that? Oh, yeah. So nothing that day. The next day, we go to the top of the mountain. We hike around, do another 15 miles, and nothing that day. And then Jermaine shows up, and Jermaine has this saying, if you want to win, put Hodge in. And so like he's texting that to his friend Pat, and Pat's like, Jermaine's such an a-hole. And so Jermaine shows up, does the exact same thing that Pat's been doing this whole time, but first call, a bull answers and is coming in. Wind's bad, the wind, he runs off. We reposition 300 yards down the hill, and he starts calling again. And I'm not kidding you, within 5 minutes he called in 5 different bulls.
Wow.
Yeah, it like. We're standing there, and one comes in like behind us. So I'm up in front down the hill, and I grab my bow and I run up to next to Jermaine. And when I get next to him, 15 feet, not yards, 15 feet to our left, 3 bulls come in. The first one sees us, stops. The other 2 run into that bull, knock it over, and it like rolls in front of us. and it stands up, and Jermaine's like, draw your bow and shoot that thing. And I'm like, there's 3 more to your left. And Jermaine's literally just like wide-eyed, slowly looking. He looks over there, he sees all these other bulls, and then they all spook. And he's like, well, oh man. And so like I run back and grab my backpack. And then as soon as I grab my backpack, another bull comes in right to this exact same spot. But it's moving and I'm moving, but the bush is in between us. I can never get a view of its vitals.
Yeah.
All I can ever see is just its rump. So I'm just like moving, and it just keeps moving, and then it runs off. And so then I go back down because I drop my backpack again, and I'm looking, and I see another elk. I'm talking 80 yards through the brush, and I'm like, they're like, okay, yeah, you want to win, put Hodge in. Like, he's right. And so it was just the craziest day. It was insane. There was like 4 or 5 of us. They actually recorded a lot of it. I'm hoping that they can. They were going to put some video out sometime soon, but I'm hoping they got a bunch of that on
He's
video.
got it all as footage.
We'll see. I haven't seen any of it, so we'll see what it ends up looking like. But yeah, it was crazy. So we had, I wouldn't say we had an opportunity, but there were elk everywhere, every day, just all over us. But the only time I drew back is when I actually killed the bull that I killed on day 8.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
But it's also nice to have like a bunch of action going on around you. I mean, you must have been feeling like, oh, something's going to happen now. If you suddenly, the Hodge comes in.
Yeah. I don't think there was a day that we didn't see elk. It was
amazing.
It was a great trip. Now, again, didn't have opportunities, but it's just fun to see them, call to them, and have them, holler back. So we knew that it was eventually going to happen if we put in enough time.
Yeah, man. When it did, how was the pack out and everything? I mean, so the shot goes off. I mean, maybe we're jumping ahead. You get to that point, day 8, you draw the bow back. What is it, like a 40-yard shot, something like that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll tell the story. Why not? So we the night before, I told Jermaine, I'm like, man, I am tired. Can we have a night where like we always see elk in this particular valley? Let's go sit there and glass it. If something comes up, we'll go after it. And he's like, okay, let's do that. Jermaine can't sit still. So we're there for like an hour. And then he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk to the top of that mountain. And when we get up there, I'm going to rip some bugles. And then we're going to just chase after whatever happens. And I'm just looking at this guy like, oh, man, I'm tired. And I was like, Jermaine, 5 minutes. Like, I was like, I'm not talking to you about that for 5 minutes. Being just like, I've got to think of something to tell him. Like, I'm telling him basically I want to keep watching this field.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm really trying to think, how do I convince him not to go up there? And fortunately, while I'm telling him 5 minutes, I look over his shoulder and I see a bull. And I'm like, yeah, that's down, not up. We're going in right there. That's where we're going. And so we're on this big, tall rock that actually looks over everything. So we sneak down the backside of it. We drop down again, cross this little stream, and we're cruising up the tree line. The wind is perfect. It's coming right down the valley, right to us. And so we're like, yeah, let's just cruise in the trees until we get to where that elk is, try and lay eyes on it, and then put on a stock. So we get probably 50%, no, maybe 70% of the way there, probably 150 yards, something like that, with another 50 or so, maybe 100 to go. And a baby calf moose jumps up and runs off. And we're like, uh-oh, where's Mama?
Yeah.
And then next thing we know, Mama jumps up and runs right through us and just stops 30 yards from us and is just staring us down. And we're like, well, we can't move.
Yeah.
And we don't want Mama to stomp us. But we can see the elk on the other side of this little like finger opening in this valley. And the elk don't see us. They don't know anything about us, but the moose spooked the elk. So we're like, well, damn. So we just stand there and 40 minutes of us staring down Mama Moose. And I was like, well, this is a crazy experience to be this close to a moose. If I had a tag,
yeah,
dead. Like no doubt. She didn't move.
Yeah.
She had eyes on both of us, just standing there. Eventually we're like, okay, let's just get out of here. Let's just slowly back away. We backed away and we got out of there.
What did she do?
And stood there. Didn't move. I assume maybe she went and found her baby or something. Later on, I think that's actually what happened. But the valley that we were hunting is, if you continue kind of downhill from there, it closes up, the trees close up, and then it opens up into another valley. So we're like, let's go to that valley and then get out of here, walk back to the truck. And it's basically dusk. Like, we can't really see very well, but I'm looking into this field and I'm like, I think there's an elk at the bottom of this field. And we're talking like 600 yards. So you pull up our binos and you can see better because it allows more light in. And we're like, yeah, there's a bull down there. And so like, let's go. Like we got maybe 5 to 10 minutes once we get down there. So we sprint in the trees down this valley, down to the bottom. And Jermaine starts calling. And this bull is piping off. Like they are growling at each other. They're going back and forth. For a second, he's like, it's coming. So he has me drop down into the valley.
Yeah.
The valley is filled with bear brush that's 12 feet high. I can't see anything. Like nothing's working. I'm like, I think he's calling this bull in, but I don't know. And so I'm like trying to get to points where I can see. The bull never really came in, but they were calling back and forth for 30 minutes, like past the point that I could shoot by a long shot. Either way, so I'm like, okay, I can't do anything here, so I'm gonna back out. I back out to Jermaine, and he is like a chipmunk, just jazzed. He's like, oh, like just getting into that yelling match with that bull, and he's so fired up. And I actually recorded this video. I'm like, Jermaine, what'd we just do? And he's like, this is what we live for. Like the most fired up I've ever seen a human. And so we eventually go back to camp and we tell everybody our story. And he's like, okay, well, tomorrow we're gonna go climb these mountains and that mountains. And I was like, well, hold on. Still in my like saving my legs kind of mentality. I'm like, wait, let's just back up a little bit here, Jermaine. What would you expect that bull to do? We didn't spook him out of there. He had a bunch of cows. What would you expect him to do? And he's like, oh, he'd probably be there in the morning. And I'm like, well, then let's go back there in the morning. It's like, why would we do anything different? Like, we know we've got a hot bull. Like, let's go back and have you scream at him. He's like, all right, it's your tag. We can do whatever you want.
But the mountains are calling him.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to just hike. I'm like,
just
no,
want
I
to
don't
go
want
up
to hike.
the hill.
Yeah, I was like, you bastard. Either way, we go back the next morning. We get into a good position to start calling, kind of up in the trees at this peak above the valley, and we're calling and nothing's happening. So we're like, well, what the hell? Like, maybe he's not here. So we drop down into the valley and we're looking there and there's nothing. Like, well, I guess you were wrong because he's not here. But either way, let's keep hiking. And then all of a sudden we see a cow. And then we see another one. And we eventually he had called in apparently all of the cows in the area after we'd gotten him fired up. There was 15 or so cows and him. And the way these valleys are, there's two of them, both kind of, it's like a capital T, right? But they're both kind of going uphill. And so he's right at the junction of that T. And we're kind of just down one of the veins from him. But we know that our wind is going straight down to him. So we're like, let's not move. Let's wait until he crosses over to the other side of the T, and he'll probably walk up that other valley. He does exactly that. And so we shoot across the bear brush. It's not easy to get through. It's swampy, but we get through to go to the other side. And we're just like, let's drop down to that other end of the valley. If we're behind him, the wind will be coming in our face, and we should be good to see where he is, and we can make a play from there. So we're just moving quick as we can down our side of this valley. And as we're hiking, I just realized I see elk feet, like just legs. And so I stop Jermaine. Pat is behind me. Pat runs into me. And I'm like, elk. And so
through the brush? Like
through the brush.
Like under the bottom of the brush, you can see them.
Yeah, just one elk.
Okay.
And I see legs.
Yeah.
So I managed to somehow stop the group, and it walks out and it sees us. And it stops, and it's the bull. And Jermaine's like, knock an arrow. And I'm like, oh, yeah, shit. So I look at the bull, and I'm like, yeah, he stopped, and this bull stopped with its head exactly behind a tree. So it can't see me, and then behind me is Pat, so it can't see Pat. The only thing it can see is little old Jermaine Hodge, like 3 feet to my left. So I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll knock an arrow. So I knock an arrow, and Jermaine goes, 40 yards. And I'm like, all right. So I look and I'm like, there's a lot of trees. Can I shoot through that? And he's like, you got this. And I'm like, wow, what a positive influence here. Let's do it. So I pull back and I realize that there's a branch right in front of me. So I just drop down. I sort of get down into a squat, like a standing squat at full draw.
That's a tough shot. And
I let it rip. And my Luminoc goes off. I've sent you this video. I'll send it to you again if you want.
Yeah.
But the Luminoc goes off, which is, for those that don't know archery, it's like everyone's like, why is your arrow on fire? It's basically an LED that when you fire the string makes the knock of the arrow glow, makes it really easy to track your arrow, see where you hit, and also find your arrow after hopefully you hit something. So it goes in, and this elk is quartering to me, and it goes in right behind the shoulder blade, zips right through it, like no problem. And he rears up and runs off. and he didn't make a lot of noise. So we know he didn't go into the trees with the downfall. We thought he went back out into the valley.
Okay.
And so at this point, we also have a camera guy with us. And so we all just sit down. We're like, we're going to wait. We're going to wait an hour and let's watch that video. So pull the card, get it on our phones, and we're watching this. And they're like, ooh, maybe you shot it in the ass. I'm like, I didn't shoot in the ass. Like, so it went from like, when I shot it, everyone being like, yeah, you killed it. You killed it. Like on our eyes, we all thought it was a done deal. Watching the video, now all of a sudden we can critique every little bit of it. And they're like, well, maybe it's a little far back. Maybe, who knows? Let's give it 2 hours. And so now we sit there for 2 hours and I'm just like, this sucks. It's 8 a.m. and I'm like, okay, let's go look. And so Jermaine looks for the arrow, and he looks up at me. He's like, oh, there's a lot less room to get that arrow through than I thought. And apparently I had like a 3-inch window, and I managed to just hit that window perfectly. Didn't hit any branches.
Wow.
But Jermaine finds the arrow. It's covered in blood. He's smelling it, like you do, to see if you hit the guts. Yeah. And he's like, well, maybe. He's like, it smells a little funny, but being a quartering 2,
there probably will be guts. Yeah,
you'd expect a little bit. And so he's like, all right, well, let's start looking for blood. Just 4 of us, and we're just looking. 3 of us are in the tree line. We see like 2 or 3 steps, and then nothing. No blood. Not a drop of blood anywhere. And we lose the steps. And so we've been looking for half an hour, and we see nothing. And then I'm like, whatever. I walk out into the field, and I see Jermaine standing on a rock, doing the old sailor, trying to block the sun from his eyes. He's got his hand up and salute. And he's like, I see something funny. And Pat and I are like, he looks like he's walking with some gumption or whatever you want to call it. He sees something that he wants to check out. Turns out what happened, he found the elk. And he had found it because he was looking for antlers, but he saw a rock that looked weird. That's it. So the elk had turned into the field, ran about 100 yards, reared up, and apparently I'd hit the lung, hit everything I needed to hit, and it had basically bled to death in under 10 seconds.
Whoa.
And the blood didn't leave its cavity, so it was drowning. So it reared up, lost its balance, and fell backwards. So the only thing that was showing was its chest. Its arms and legs were down, its antlers were in the dirt, and its chest was up. So it was like this bright yellow furry rock is what Jermaine said he saw. And so he ran over to it, and there it was. Just, it took 2 of us to get it out of the mud without stabbing someone, because it was spring-loaded, basically. Spring-loaded antlers in the ground, just ready to shoot back. So, we waited 2 hours, but that thing had to be dead within 30 seconds.
Man, that's such a great story.
And then you asked about the pack out. So it died in the middle of this field, a swamp, basically. It died on the only patch of dry ground. Like, we had like a 30-foot circle of dry ground, and we're like, yes,
perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Elk. Jermaine's like, I didn't bring a knife. Who's got a knife? And I'm like, well, I have one. He takes my knife. Him and Pat processed that entire thing down, skinned, where the skin came off with the head, because I'm going to do a shoulder mount.
Yeah.
Quartered, backstraps, tendies, everything out, gutless method. In like 45 minutes, they're done.
No
just
way.
Just completely done. And I'm sitting there watching it. The only thing I did was like, you have to keep the proof of sex. And so Pat's like, hold this, and he slaps the big old dong in my hand, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I guess this is what I got to do. That's what I got to do. So like, while Pat's cutting the hind quarter off, I'm just keeping the pecker out of the way of his blade so it didn't get cut off for legal purposes. But that's literally all I did. Those boys just tore that thing down. And then we had, there's 4 of us. The cameraman was an elderly gentleman, so he actually he carried my bow back. I carried, I think, a hind quarter. Somebody and the other boys each carried a quarter, and then we went back, and Jermaine carried a hind quarter. Pat carried the extra pieces, back straps and things like that. And then I carried the hide and the head. And I had never done that before. It's the heaviest thing I've ever carried to this day, like by far. And part of the issue was when I was putting it on my bag, I'm like, should I put the antlers up, guys, or should I put the antlers down? They're like, you're tall enough, you can probably go antlers down. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I strap it all up, get this thing on, get the hide on there, and I start walking. And then I realize almost immediately that I'm walking through 5 feet tall bare brush, and these antlers are catching every bush, and I'm just ripping every step. Is just this laborious effort to move forward. And so it was awful until we eventually got to a path. That wasn't so bad. And then, we got out of there pretty quick. I would say before shot the bull at 6, 2 hours of waiting. We were back at camp having victory beer by like 9:30. So it wasn't, it was hard work, but it wasn't super long.
Good times.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And like, I can't think of it without smiling.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
Yeah.
such a good memory.
I kind of love those moments where you like just got to suck it up because you think that the work was hard before, but once the animal's down, I mean, it's a cliche, but like the work really does begin, doesn't it?
Yes.
I've got a
absolutely.
story. I got a story for you. If I can jump in with one.
Please do.
I haven't told this story, I don't think. It's also along the theme of like a furry rock.
Best kind of rock.
So, but then actually, before we jump into that, I have a question. I've always wondered about this. Like, see people like hiking out with giant elk antlers, like high up on above their backs. Like, that seems like, I mean, I guess you've got to have like orange on that thing, right? Because you don't want to be walking around like a giant antenna and going, hey, I'm a target right here. It seems like it could be a little bit risky making yourself a target.
Yeah. Well, conveniently, archery, no one's really going to shoot.
If it's just archery season.
Yeah. So I was glad I shot it when I did. The next day, muzzleloader opens in Colorado. Muzzleloader season is in the middle of archery season, but I shot it during archery season. I do always keep a like orange flag in my pack for exactly that reason, in case I'm like, I want to make sure people know what's going on here. Didn't have to use it then. We're in an open field. They could see me better than they could see the elk, and I had the antlers down. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a dangerous thing. I think 2 years ago, an archery hunter got shot by a muzzleloader hunter in Colorado and killed. So man. It's definitely some hunters out there are just shooting at movement and antlers. So
I guess it's easy to be like, oh yeah, how could you possibly do that? But you never know. If you get like the adrenaline pump and you just think that you're seeing one thing, and I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be easy to have opinions about that, but who knows unless you're actually in the situation.
100%. Yeah. Ugh. Ugh. All right, let's hear your fuzzy rock.
Okay, fuzzy rock. Well, I mean, first of all, I had like a bunch of amazing things happen when I was over in South Africa last time. Like, it was... I mean, I think last time we spoke, I told you a bunch of stories about hunting with Fred Hammer, and kind of, it was almost like the seasoning that gave me the taste for like how good hunting can be.
Yeah. And
like my time there now, just this like a few months ago, was absolutely as delicious as I thought that it could possibly be. It was it was so amazing, and like those extra ingredients of understanding all these like tools and knowledge and like the depth and complexity of like knowing how to move in the wild that I was like so dazzled by beforehand was all like starting to click into place. And that was, I mean, you must feel that as well. And we'll jump to that, I'm sure, when you're in Hawaii. It's like that having those experiences again and again is just learning and realizing your own progress is just such a nice moment, right? Like progress in anything is always a positive feeling.
Yeah, I think I shared this with you when we were talking before the podcast a week or so ago. But with hunting, especially archery hunting, like I think 5 years of hunting, I shot one arrow, and I was like, oh yeah, I killed a bull. That it wasn't easy, but there we go. And then Molokai, which I compared to your African trips, is like you have enough opportunity to make mistakes and then correct them right then and there, which is super cool. And it's if you can as a hunter go out and find an opportunity where you're going to get lots of opportunity, it's like years worth of big game hunting, because you're just going to be able to make those mistakes and then fix them, or at least think about them, and not have a year to forget those mistakes before you go and make the mistake again. So I'm jealous of your Africa trips after Molokai, because I was like, that's amazing. Like that was so much fun. And I think I still even got a fraction of the opportunities that you get when you're in Africa.
I think it's also, especially as we've already explained, like the two of us coming to hunting a bit later than perhaps a lot of other people who grew up with it and had all those experiences, generational knowledge, and also, that stuff. We got to do something to try and get ahead on the curve. And It seems like this kind of thing is the way to do it, like accelerated, a lot of stalks, that kind of experience. But okay, so furry rock. Over at that time that I was over there, it was kind of, let me think about what time of year it was. It was sort of summery time. So it's not the most ideal time to be hunting in the African heat. But that's the time that I was over there. We were seeing family. It was actually over the holidays, the Christmas time. Okay. So in the Southern Hemisphere, that's actually pumping summer, or like the beginning of absolute rip-roaring hot summer. So I'd had a bunch of other fun adventures before, like for maybe, I don't know, a few days beforehand. Got lucky with some warthogs, hunting with Fred Hammer. Some really good times. Like warthogs, I think personally are like some of the funnest animals to hunt. They're like super smart, but also still have a little bit of that pig. I don't know. I can't explain it, but
Yeah.
hogs in any way are just epic fun to
Yeah.
hunt.
Can you eat warthogs? I know they're like wild
Yeah, they're
hogs here in America.
delicious.
I would imagine so. Okay. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, warthogs are really, really good. The only pig that's better, according to some people, like Dr. Adrian DeVilliers, who's a guest on my show. I can't remember what episode it is, but he thinks that let me think about it. You've got warthogs, you have wild pigs. The name escapes me now. There's another kind. Oh, bush pig.
Okay.
Bush pig is apparently the most tasty pig, and it's very nocturnal and very violent. Those pigs are angry things, and they look it as well. They've just got these jucted like bones on their faces to protect from fighting, and they'll mess you up. So I haven't had the privilege of managing to come across one of those pigs yet, but yeah, warthogs delicious, bush pigs apparently even more delicious. I can only imagine, but they all taste good.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's also happens to be in South Africa a lot of fallow deer, and which is kind of surprising because you think fallow deer, you think New Zealand or Australia, I guess. But yeah, there's a bunch over there as well, and particularly in the Eastern Cape where I like to do quite a bit of hunting. I mean, I hunted quite a few areas, but over there's a ton of fallow deer. But at that time of year, it's like a couple of months before the rut begins. So the males, it's kind of like not the time to be chasing males. You could shoot one, like they might have a reasonable size rag, but it'll be in felt. And It's also just kind of like the culture there is like, don't go around shooting bucks before they're like fully grown at that time of year. So
yeah, that makes sense.
You know, means that chasing the does is the way to go. And there's a lot of them around, and it's like great fun, you know, like, so this furry rock situation, there was a lot of firsts when I was over in South Africa, you know, shooting a lot of other animals, like a kudu bull was my first. That it was like shooting a duiker from like 6 yards away. It was an unbelievable first, but shooting two animals in like 45 seconds with a bow
Okay.
was another first. And that was two fallows. And I guess I was like making a move through an area, and I saw a fallow deer and did, you know, put into action the things that I've been taught about walk and stalk, moving around, getting to the shade. And there was this perfect moment where the doe had its head in a bush. It was just feeding, chowing in this bush. And I thought, okay, this is a perfect moment. Now, like, I think my previous experience would have told me to stay where I was. I was probably like 45 yards away, maybe 35. I don't know exactly how far away it was. But I was coming out of the side of the bush that was on the sunny side. And the things that I learned over there is that the eyes of everything is so keen that, like, drawing back, but even behind the bush and then coming out to like take the shot from there, you're going to make life harder for yourself. Like, they're probably going to see you just because it's that light pinging off you. The level of awareness of just knowing all that stuff. So in a weird way that was like counters to what you might think, I actually waited while its head was in a bush, crawled through the open couple of yards, 3 yards maybe, and then across to another bush that was fully in shade. And I was actually nothing in front of me, but I was like deep in the shade. And at that moment then, I was able to draw back, and the next moment that it put its head down, took this shot, and it was like, shots don't always go perfect. I'm sure we all know that as archers, but that one was just like perfect, quartering away, I don't know, 35 yards, something like that. And it's just the arrow went through, smacked the back shoulder, and the thing was just down. It didn't run. It didn't go anywhere. It just like hit the ground and was just like, you know, didn't understand what was going on. And it was just like perfect. But at that moment, I'm like, okay, standard procedure. I'm going to grab an arrow quickly, knock, get ready to go again. Like, you never know. It might get up. It might be startled. It might get up and run. So just think like, okay, I'm going to get another arrow in. If you can, shoot another arrow if you get the opportunity, right? So at that moment, I'm drawn back and I'm like lining up to take a shot. And then I just hear this like bark of like more fallows that are in that group have circled back around and just don't understand what's going on. They haven't seen me. They don't know what's going on. I'm just like in the open, but in the shade. And they just get closer, and then another closer, just crawl up to it. And they're just looking, like trying to work out what's going on with their buddy, who's just kind of, I guess, expiring their final breaths. So I should probably start by saying, like, you know, you go through your shot process, you practice, everything, you have your like routines to make sure that everything goes as well as it can. But what I never practiced was like how that routine works when you're taking another shot on an animal and your adrenaline is through the roof.
Yeah.
Man, so I was drawn back getting a bead on the first animal, and then there's other ones come in, and I've probably been holding for like 45, 60 seconds. At that point, you've got the adrenaline, you're not feeling anything. And I was like, whoa, I'm going to take another shot on this other doe. Oh man, I should have like taken a breath or something, just like calm myself down, because the second shot was not good.
Yeah.
It was not a good shot, man. I think maybe my shoulder was a bit tired from holding and drawn back so long, but I like pulled that shot a bit too much, and I just hit like center body, and it was not like a good money shot, lungs and everything. It was kind of maybe slightly forward of center. So I was like, that is maybe liver at best. So yeah, it ran that moment where you're like, oh, why did I even bother taking a second shot? Right? Like, it was pure instinct.
Yeah. Just in the moment, man.
Yeah. You're in the moment. You're like, oh my God, like this thing could be, I think this is happening. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So
I know that feeling exactly from Molokai. There was times where I'm like, after I did it, I'm like, what did I do that for?
Yeah.
But what are you going to do?
Exactly. What are you going to do? So I felt a bit of a silly Billy, as they would say in England at that point. I saw it run off, and yeah, I just thought like, oh no, I've really screwed this up. At that point, it was pretty dark. It was getting really dark. There wasn't much time left. Fred was just like, we need to just wait, like,
yeah,
there's no point chasing this thing around. It's just going to run further. So it was that long wait, man. Like, and I think I couldn't believe my luck. Like, this whole trip, I had a lot of luck. It was amazing. At that point, it had been a hot summer's day. So it's not a time that you want to be leaving an animal overnight, right? You don't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
But at that particular moment, like, the clouds just rolled in. Like, it was like a message. And it started raining, and it just chilled. It dropped like 20 plus degrees. I don't know, like instantly. Like the 5 minutes, 10 minutes after taking that shot, I couldn't believe my luck. So yeah, after processing the first animal in the dark, the long sleepless night, came back the next day, and it was one of those things again where instinct and luck, I guess a mixture, probably more luck than instinct, to be honest. But it was that thing where you start trying to realize like, what's going on? Where's this thing gone? I saw it run in a certain direction, run off, say, I think it went west. But like, from the things I'd heard in podcasts or conversations, I was kind of like, this thing's going to be injured. It's probably going to go to water. And where's the nearest big watering hole? So I looked on on X, looked at where like the dams were, looked where it was. And actually the nearest dam was completely the other way.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I don't know why, but I was just like, I'm going to go there first. So I did a big loop round, got distracted by some impala for a minute. Was like, oh, they're right there. Maybe I should just make a little... No, focus. Okay, well, all right. Maybe I'll just scare them off first. But anyway, yeah, as I was walking around to that spot, I looked on the horizon, and now I saw this rock that just didn't quite look right. It was another furry rock. And it's that moment where you're like walking and you think, that rock looks a bit furry. It looks a bit weird. I don't know. You dare to hope. So just walking up, I kind of got within about 50 yards, and I could see the speckles of like a fallow deer. And I was like, okay, we're in there. Like within like 20 minutes of actually starting to walk, I was probably a mile away from where I even started. I covered the ground and managed to get there. So it's like, managed to get out of jail free on that one.
That's awesome.
And then began the process of packing it out and like throwing it in the dam to cool it down as quickly as possible, just in case. And actually, it was kind of a wild moment running across like a whole mile or two to get my very tiny rental car driving on an off-road track that was like really, really rough, bouncing around. Oh, it was like, I don't know. I mean, the car did fantastically. And I had one tiny tarp with me that was just big enough to put in the back, in the trunk, and put the animal in, get back, and get it cooled. But yeah, no meat lost.
That's too funny, man. That's too funny. I'm glad you had the tarp. I was just waiting for you to hear just throwing the bloody, deer in the back of the rental.
That would have been terrible. That would have been such a predicament, wouldn't it? Like, oh, do I
Yeah.
want to lose however many $100
Lose your
deposit on
deposit.
this?
Yeah. That's too funny, man.
So, it was a good moment, but also stressful, man, and like not what you want to do. And I definitely learned that lesson. I'll think twice again before throwing another arrow so quickly. I'll definitely make sure that I'm go through that process again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me do this. So I'll tell some stories about me taking some decisions that I like after the fact was like, I don't know how I feel about that because they're from Molokai, right? My most recent hunt. I haven't shared these stories with anyone yet. So I'll just go through my whole trip. I'll try not to be too brief or too long-winded, but
Go for it, man.
We get
we
there.
got time.
Yeah. It's the first hunt, right? So the first morning, they just sort of drop me off and they say, sit along those pipes. There's these big metal pipes. There's like 50 of them stacked up. And I'm like, okay, sure. Like this doesn't seem like a very good hunting spot to me, but
I'm just going to take off my jumper. It's getting hot in here.
That's fine.
I got overexcited with that story. Okay. Okay, go on. Carry on. You're at the pipes.
Yeah, so they put me at the pipes, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, well, this doesn't seem like a great hunting spot to me, but whatever. We're like, we're all sitting, everyone's got good cell reception, so we're just kind of spaced out along this road. And they tell me, hey, they come through, they don't stop moving. You got to take shots at animals that are moving, which typically I wouldn't do.
Really?
Yeah, because I was told that they are the jumpiest deer of all deer, and the reason why is they come from India. Their only natural predator is the Bengal tiger. So they just like I've seen like a doe get spooked by her calf, or not calf. Calf's not the right word. Either way, the baby deer was just jumping around playing, and that scared the mom to run away. Like anything and everything makes these deer jump. It's absolutely crazy, and they never stop moving. Is what I was told. So the first morning I'm sitting there and they're like, hey, there's some deer coming your way. And I see them, they're all like 80, 90 yards running by, and they don't stop moving. And I'm like, there's no way I'm taking a shot. These things are basically sprinting by.
Yeah.
I get another text saying, hey, more coming your way. And I see them and they're just sort of feeding along. And so they're not moving very fast, but they're like 90 yards. And so I scoot forward about 10 yards in the pipes, from the back of the pipes more to the front of the pipes, in this little gap. And I'm building up the courage to take that 80-yard shot. I'm like, I know it is a long way. I've never shot at an animal that long. I didn't love the idea of it, which is why I was like building up the courage. Yeah. And then I realized they're moving actually towards me. And I'm like, sweet, I'll just sit right here. They'll come right by and I'll take a shot. So they come by at 40 yards and they stop right in front of me. And I'm like, well, this isn't supposed to happen. This is easy. Let's do it. So I pull back, nothing moves. Put my pin out there. Everything's still good. Let her rip, and my arrow goes right underneath. I used my 30 pin and not my 40 pin on this herd. Man. So like there was 10 deer, and it just right underneath them. They all just start running everywhere. I walk over there, see my arrow completely dry, covered in red dirt because there's red dirt everywhere, and I'm like, I screwed up. Like they say they don't stop running, and those ones were standing there, and I missed. Like how could I do that? And I'm thinking, man, I might have just blown my only opportunity, because I knew that the year before multiple guys had come and not killed any. So I'm like, that might have been the one. And this is the first morning of 7 days. So I'm like, I might have just screwed this entire thing. Like that might have been my only opportunity. So I'm just like, I'm pissed. Either way, no one. I think one guy did kill a doe that morning, which was great. We then took it back, we processed it, or maybe it was that evening hunt that he did it, but we had back straps and tenderloins and ate like kings that night. So it was a fun night. The next morning, not much happens for me specifically, but the second evening was the interesting evening for me. So I'm sitting at this place they call the Broken Pipe. It's again a large pipe that water's filled with, but there's a crack in it, and so it just leaks water, and the animals know that they can get water from it. So there's this great blind. It's about 60 yards from the pipe, and I'm sitting there. And at this point, deer come in, like a herd of deer, and they're like 90 yards. And I'm like, no, they'll come closer. They'll come closer. And they never really did, and they took off. I'm like, okay, well, I'm seeing deer, so that's good news. So I just sit there and keep waiting, and I see more coming in. But these deer come to about 60 yards. And you said, you pull back. I'm in this blind. This doe, its back half is covered by a bush, but I can see its vitals. I can see her head. Her head's down. She's feeding. And I'm like, this is it. 60 yards. Exactly 60 yards. I can range. She has no idea that I'm there. I pull back. and I just the perfect release. You know that feeling, like it was your
Yeah,
first
yeah,
shot, right? Where
yeah, yeah.
it breaks, you aren't sure when it's going to break, and it breaks perfectly. You know your pin was exactly where you wanted it to go, and you're positive that arrow is going to do everything that you want it to do, and it hits exactly where I wanted it to. But the deer had left apparently 10 minutes earlier because it just ate into the dirt, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" So they scatter and they run around, and I could see my knock glowing. We already talked about how I use Luminox, and I'm just like, damn. So I take a photo and I draw a deer on the photo and send it out to the guys, and I'm like, well, that's where the deer was standing. Damn it. And so at this point, I'm starting to think, okay, is my bow not fast enough? Is my bow too noisy? So I have the bow hitch on my bow, which is a great thing to help you carry it when you're in the brush. You don't have to actually carry the thing. But I didn't bring a screwdriver, and I had to take it
Ah,
off when I brought it in. So I put it on like by hand, and there was an obvious rattle. So I popped that off. That was the first thing I did. And I put the screws back in, but I put the bow hitch in my bag, and I'm like, okay, we're back to hunting. Another deer comes in, or another group of deer come in, and it's maybe so dark that I'm like, I wouldn't be probably shooting if it weren't for the fact that these are an invasive species. They are destroying the island. They want them gone. I kind of have the mentality of like wild hogs in southern United States, right? They're,
yeah.
they're, they're, they're a menace. People don't want them there. So I'm like, okay, I'll take a shot that I wouldn't normally take. And so it's 60 yards again. I pull back. This deer's looking, I would say quartering two, and I rip. And again, the deer just runs up to me, slaps me in the face, and runs off. Like I'm like, I can't, my bow's not fast enough. I don't know what I'm gonna do here. Like I've gotten
It's
two
just gone.
great shots at these deer, and this last one was like it's too dark to really like do anything. In my arrow, I don't even know where it went. It disappeared. It like bounced. Couldn't find it. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna hang out for another 5-10 minutes and I'll start packing out. And another herd comes in. But at this point, it's too dark. I can't see anything. And I'm like, but I have to walk through where they are to get out. So I sit there for like 10 to 15 minutes and I'm like, what do I do here? And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna shine a light at them, see what happens. So I take my headlamp and I get to the red light where
Yeah.
supposedly deer can't see, but people can. So I plop it over the red light, hiding it in my backpack or in my jacket or whatever, and I shine it at them, and they don't move. They don't move an inch. And I'm like, no way. So I like take my rangefinder and I range them. I'm like, they're at 45 yards on this hill across this little canyon. I'm like, no way. They're just sitting there. So I'm like, let's do it. So this is again, I wouldn't shoot this after dark, which is legal, but I wouldn't
Yes.
necessarily say do this. I wouldn't do what I did. And I missed entirely, so it's okay. It's okay. But I got the light on my head, and I see the deer, and so I put an arrow in. They're not moving; they're just staring at me like, "What is that?" I can't quite figure it out because apparently they can't see the red. And I pull back, and when I pull back and lean in to look into my peep sight to look through my sight at the deer, all I can see is my bow. My light was just illuminating my bow.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything behind it was black, just complete black. And I'm like, well, they're 45 yards and they're right there. So I was like, screw it. And I just threw an arrow into the darkness. And I missed by a lot. Like it just went into the dirt. And I was like, well, that was dumb. I don't like, it was like your second shot. Like, why did I shoot that? Why did I do that? And I don't know why I did. In retrospect, maybe I should have like brought it down, set the light next to me, and then tried, because you could easily see them. They weren't that far. But just
Yes.
my bow was like a glowing red.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
only thing I could see. So they ended up getting away. I shot 3 arrows, and really was pretty frustrated, right? Because now I've shot 4 arrows, 5 arrows, or something like that, and had really great opportunities and still screwed up all of them. And so this goes back to like, just getting opportunity. So I'm like, okay, well, now I know I'm not going to shoot that far. Like
Yeah.
they're too
Yeah.
fast. I'm not going to shoot
Yeah.
60 yards. So I got to make adjustments. I've taken my bow hitch off. I'm making adjustments. I'm gonna get this done. Just trying to stay positive when I feel like I've just completely screwed the pooch on everything, right? So I think it's the next morning. There's this one spot right by the place we're staying, and they're like, "Yeah, there's always big bucks in there. Why does no one ever hunt there?" And I keep hearing them say that, and I'm like, "Well, I'll hunt there." So I go there that morning, and I figure out why. There are so many damn mosquitoes. Like I'm there for 10 minutes, and I'm like, "Nope, this ain't happening. I'm not even gonna bother. Like I can't sit here any longer. I'm already when there's not a lot of mosquitoes, I'm the guy that gets the mosquito bites. So being the only one there when there's so many mosquitoes, you can't even stand it. I was like, nope, I'm just going to get out of here. And actually, the night before, we'd run into the game warden. There's one game warden on the whole island. And of course,
Oh
we
yeah.
run into him. Great guy. But he told us walk all the way to the other side of this ridge because the big bowl to this opposite mountain. He's like, that's where the deer are. But the group I was with, most people just get dropped off and walk in their 100 yards and they're satisfied with that because there's deer everywhere. But at this point, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to sit where I said I was going to sit and the car's not here. So I'm just going to walk to the other side of the mountain. I'm going to walk around these mountains. It's about a 2-mile trek. So I'm just walking. And as I get to out of the trees, more towards the back where this bowl is, all of a sudden deer just start barking at me. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is a good sign. They're here. Like I'm obviously doing a poor job hunting them, but they're here. But he told me that there's a water trough. So I'm like, I'm going to walk until I find that so I can maybe hunt it some other time, come in at a better time. Cause it's probably, I don't know, 7, 8 in the morning. I get to where I can see the water trough and there's deer at it. And I'm like, oh, we're all right. So I sneak down to the edge of the bowl because it doesn't have any plants. So it's just red dirt. So I pop my bag off. I pop my shoes off so I can be really quiet because my shoes have a little squeak because there's so much dust. They were squeaking.
Yeah.
So I pop all that off and I start walking in on this ridge so I can be completely silent. And I walk in probably 100 yards to where there's this big bush. I know I'm right next to him. And I stand up and I look over and I see the deer, but they're not the 30 yards that I think they would be. They're like 100 yards. And I'm like, well, what the hell's, why'd they move that far? And I can't figure it out. So I just start slowly moving in. And then I realize they didn't move. I just can't see the deer that I had originally seen. And there are probably 200 deer here. So I'm like crawling with my bow, like moving it forward, like 6 inches, crawling a little bit. And then I realized that I can hear deer. I can't see them. I can't see them, but they're like within 10 feet in every direction of me. And I'm like, oh no, like, what have I done? Like there's deer everywhere. And so eventually one of them smells me and they all take off. And I just stand up and I'm like, this is so cool. Like, I don't even care that I blew this. I mean, I've never been somewhere where 200 animals were just running in every direction around me. And I'm like, that was awesome. And so I was like, I don't even know what to do at this point. So I just walked back to our camp and told everybody. I was like, yeah, I ran into 200 deer. I don't know what happened. It was absolutely crazy. And the next evening I hunted, that evening, nothing. Didn't see anything. So I'm like, all right, that next morning I was like, I'm going to hike back over there. I don't care how far it is. I'm going to go. And I picked out a bush that I would sit at that would give me shade in the morning because there really was not any cover. There's just like 3-foot tall bushes everywhere.
Yeah.
But there's one big one. So I was like, I'll stand on what would be, I guess, the west side of that bush so that the shade is there for at least a little while. So I get there and I'm standing there and I'm there's deer at the trough when I arrive, like 5 in the morning, right? Still dark. And I could see the deer because it's a big, bright sky. And I'm like, I spook them. And I'm like, that's okay. There'll be more. I don't have to worry about it. So I get to the spot that I want and I'm like, 50 yards. Is that good enough? Is that good enough? And I'm like, no, it's not good enough. I gotta get closer. So I sneak 10 yards closer. I'm basically sitting on a road, but I have cover on each side, but I'm on the road that you can drive up to this thing if you have access. Yeah. And I just am sitting there and all of a sudden a buck walks in with a doe. And I'm like, oh man, but he's on the opposite side of this trough. And this trough is 3 feet wide, 16 feet long, 3 feet tall, made of solid concrete. And 3 sides of it are brush. So he's on the opposite side. So I can see his head, his antlers, but I can't shoot his body. Like I can't even drop it in. It's too tight. So I'm sitting there and he starts moving. And so I pull back and the does spook. And so the doe runs off and the buck runs off. But he stops because he doesn't quite know what's going on. And I'm like, damn it, 60 yards. So I let my arrow fly and I miss short. And I'm like, damn it. Like, how does this keep happening? Like, I'm never going to get this done. This is the most frustrating thing ever. It's like, rather than failing because I'm not seeing animals, I'm failing because I suck. Like, this is totally different experience.
It sounds like a tough situation anyway, man. Like, it's like a sudden change in range it's always a Hail Mary, right? Like,
right?
To land a perfect shot then is tough.
Yeah. So then I'm literally just sitting there and we're talking 5 minutes has gone by. I'm staring at my boots, trying not to cry. Just like, oh, this sucks. Like, I hate this. Well, how do I keep missing it? And I'm also like, I'm running out of broadheads because I'm losing my arrows because you can't find them. Of course, I have red glowing nocks and the dirt's red. So like they hit the ground and they disappear even though they're glowing. And I just had a corner of my eye because I can see through this brush at the trough. I see another buck and he's twice the size of the first one. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah. And he's at the end of the trough. So he's quartering away from me, looking away, head in the trough, and I can see his whole body. And I'm like,
Perfect.
I was like, this couldn't be better. And I can, from seeing him to pulling back, couldn't have been more than 7 seconds. Because I was like, if there's another deer here, don't care. I can hit that deer. And I pull back, and it was exactly 40 yards. And I put my 40-yard pin on him, and it went right in behind his shoulder blade. And I just heard, which I wasn't sure at the time if it was his other shoulder blade or it had gone all the way through and hit the concrete of the trough.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he just jumps up and like basically does a backflip. I see my arrow sticking out of him. The glowing knock is flying like crazy. It shoots up into the air and he runs off. And I was like, I think I did it. I think I got it. I'm like, I'm going to wait 30 minutes. I ended up waiting like 15 because I was like just too jacked up. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go look for him yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the other arrows that I had already lost. Because I think I actually fired one the day before and then one that morning. And so I was like, I got to find some broadheads here because I'm running out of ability to hunt. And I'm walking across the road, walk towards the trough. And all of a sudden in the brush on the other side, I see more antlers. And I'm like, oh shit, it's another buck. And so it just starts hopping and it runs away. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go looking for my arrows over there. Like there's still a lot of deer. I'm just going to start looking for blood. Let's find my arrow. I can't even find my arrow. Like I saw it hit it. I saw where it landed. Like I said, red dirt everywhere. It had buried itself in the dirt and I couldn't find it, but I knew the rough direction that the deer was going. So I walked that way and then looked back and I ended up finding it. And I took a video of it and there's no blood. And I'm like, oh, like a couple specks. And I'm like, oh no. Did I hit the front shoulder blade? Was like what I was worried about.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I picked it up, brought it out of the brush that's on the ground, and the backside was covered in blood. And I'm like, okay, we're on to something here.
Yeah.
Turns out access deer, apparently they just don't bleed. They say it's because they're dehydrated, but they just don't bleed at all. So I know that he's heading a general direction. I know where my arrow is. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to head towards that game trail in hopes that that's what he did. And I'm going to look, and I'm looking, everything's red, everything's green, and I'm looking for specks of blood. Like we're talking
So hard.
like half a centimeter specks are all I'm finding. And I'm finding them, every 15 feet. So it's not like I'm finding a great blood trail. And I'm just like, well, if he went to this trail, that's what it looked like when I shot him. Let's go over there. And I just found a little bit more here, a little bit more there. Turns out he was right there. He had made it maybe 50 yards but literally no blood. I just got lucky. Like, again, like I just have bad luck with blood trails because, and it was different broadheads each time. This time I used a sever and, turns out the arrow went in. It did hit that other shoulder blade. He ran 50 yards and he expired, man, in less than 30 minutes. I don't know how long exactly, but beautiful deer. If you guys haven't seen axis deer before, they look like baby deer, but full size with super unique antlers. They're very cool.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, and this is a secret I hadn't told many people, but I'd actually never broken down an animal by myself before until then. And I was like, all right, get the knife out. Let's figure this thing out. So yeah, I always had someone there to kind of support me or just take over, right? With my elk, they just took over. They didn't give me the opportunity to try. So I just started breaking it down. I wanted to make sure I saved the hide because they are so beautiful and got that thing packaged up. I was in this moment of Zen. I put just get cell phone service. So I put Spotify on, just like Hawaiian instrumental music. So I'm just like listening to the luau. I can see water in like every direction. I'm on top of this mountain with a deer. I'm like, this is amazing. I'd stand up occasionally and there were more deer drinking at the trough 50 yards away. And I'm like, this is how it's supposed to be. Like, this is so awesome. Just having a great time. And then, packed it out 2 miles back and to a standing ovation of the boys. They had the truck. There's a gate, so you can't drive in, but they had parked at that thing just waiting for me. And they were like, yeah, just fired up that, I think it was the second buck of the trip. But it was 3 times the size of the other buck that the guy got. So everyone was like just super fired up and it was a really fun experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And there's more to it. I'll try and we're going way over here. So I'll tell the last couple things quickly.
It's all, don't worry, man. It's all good. I'm enjoying your stories.
Yeah. So, then the next day, this other guy wants to go out there and he had never actually hunted before. And so it was his first archery hunt. And so he goes out there and he gets himself a doe at the same place that I had found, which is awesome. And then he went out for that evening hunt. And I helped him. I actually ran out there, grabbed his bow in his bag, and I was like, and he's carrying the whole deer out on his shoulders. And it was awesome. Another guy he'd been there 2 years and he hadn't killed anything. And he's a relatively new hunter. And he was a little maybe intimidated by walking 2 miles in the dark to a place he'd never been and trying to find the right spot. So I was like, man, I've killed a deer. I'm totally content. Let me go with you. I'll put you in the exact right spot. And this is actually a funny story, but we get there and the deer start coming in, right? So the first ones come in and he goes up and they spook. They see him. They all run. Next time a group comes in and we see 4 of them coming in. Turns out it was about 8 or so, but he pulls up and they do spook, but this one deer stops. And
Is it a doe or a buck?
a doe.
Okay.
And I'm being quick because it gets good here in a second. But he pulls back, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything. Let me film this thing. So I got the whole thing on video. But his arrow, when he releases, it's a perfect shot, but it hits a branch right in front of him. Like you see the branch go through it, and the arrow goes, and I lean up, and in the video, I actually drop the camera because I'm so confused. But we're on top of this mountain, and there's a trough. And it's fed by a pipe. That arrow, that branch took just enough from that arrow that it dropped right underneath the deer, and the deer was standing on top of the pipe that filled that trough. So it nails that pipe, shoots water everywhere, like straight up underneath this deer, and the deer freaks out and runs off. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And there's just a sprinkler head on the top of this mountain spraying water everywhere. And I'm like, what? You shot the, like, 1 in a million, like, you could put all us out there, use all of our arrows. We wouldn't hit that pipe if we tried. And he just perfectly split it in half. And so now we're 2 miles from anything. And I'm like, well, how do we fix this? So I like chugged my water. He had some paracord. I had a water bottle. We like cut the water bottle into a sleeve, put that around the pipe, and then used paracord to cinch it up. It was leaking, but it was a good enough fix to start the process. But we ended up later going back to town and getting all the pieces we need to fix the pipe. But after that huge mess, like it was just red dirt. Now all of a sudden it's just this giant mud pit because it was spewing so much water. I'm like, I don't think we're going to see anything here. We've been hanging out, making a lot of noise, fixing this. I was like, do you want to go stock some stuff? And he's like, no, I'll sit here. And so he sits there and nothing comes in for him. But I go to the other side of this mountain and I see a lone buck. And I'm only allowed 1 buck. I already got one. So I'm like texting the guys like, hey, if I can get a buck, can I use one of your tags? And they're all like, no, we still have a couple more days. No. And so I have an access deer call. And so I was like, let me see if I can call this thing in. And so and it looks across the canyon at me. And I'm like, oh, he knows I'm here. He goes back to feeding. He looks right up at me again. And I'm on an open hillside. There's no cover. I'm just sitting next to a rock, just being, just playing around. And he goes back to feeding, and then he starts walking away from me. So I give him a third call. He looks up at me, and he just drops straight down the canyon. And he comes, and then I'm like, oh, I think he's coming in. So now all of a sudden I'm trying to text the guys. I'm like, I think I might have accidentally called in a buck. Can I shoot this thing? And for whatever reason, my phone, I lose all service. Like I have no service, so my texts aren't going out. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, turning my phone off, turning my phone on, and then I realize that buck's 30 feet away. And I'm like, shit.
No way.
I turned my phone back on, and my text goes out. And now this deer's 10 feet away. And he came right to where I called. And I'm just sitting there looking at him. I'm like, well, I could have killed this thing, but now I can't. And he's just 10 feet away looking at me. The wind's good. He's staring at me. I'm staring at him. And then I think he's just like, I don't like the looks of this. And he runs off. And then as soon as he runs off, I get a text going, bing. Yeah, man, you can use my tag. I'm like, damn it. So he got
That's
away.
Always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, but I've never heard of anyone calling in an access deer before, and these guys have been doing this for 5 years, and they're like, "You brought calls?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I tried this in Texas, and I bought the calls for Texas, and apparently they work." So with a little doe call, I called this buck in like 150 yards across a canyon. So it was a super cool experience.
I bet you there's a few sales of those calls are now from your group of hunters.
We'll see.
I have those in their pockets.
Yeah, I left before everybody else, so I actually left the call with them, and I was like, "Try it, man." I was like, "If you can lay eyes on them, you can actually see them respond." So, but yeah, man, it was a once in a lifetime trip. I did shoot a doe the next day as well. My arrow went right through her. You know that like they say there's that like no man's land above the lungs where like you're not going to get anything. There was meat on the fletchings, but I didn't get her that night because it's actually a funny story. So I shot her and I was like dead deer, like complete pass through, like we're done. That was awesome. Shot her at 20 yards, like couldn't be more proud of that shot. I go looking for it, and again, no blood, 0 blood, and I have a full pass through. Like, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Where I shot her, she ran straight up this hill right next to her, and I lost sight of her within 5 seconds. She was immediately out of my vision. And so I have no idea where she went. So I'm walking around this hillside, and I'm like, how do I get more time? So I'm like, here's an idea. We've all been eating pretty crappy, like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner. So I was like, guys, I'll pay for pizza because they're going to come by and try and pick me up and want to go back to the house. So I'm like, instead of doing that, go to town, get pizza on me. And I was like, this buys me another hour and a half of looking for this deer. So I send them to go get pizza in town. And I didn't tell them because I couldn't find my deer. I was like, yeah, no, on me, go get the pizza. So they go get the pizza. They come back, and I ended up looking for a long time, walking a couple miles, and I never found a drop of blood. The problem was more deer just kept showing up, and I didn't want to blow out all of these deer. At one point, a herd of 200 came over this hill, and I just sat down and like watched them until the sun went down and it was completely black. And I was like, well, I guess today's not my day. So I'm 100% sure she died. I actually found her the next day, but I was already at the airport. So yeah. So
shame.
Yeah. Even if I had found her that night, I'm not sure if we had enough time to freeze the meat so I could actually have taken her home. So somebody else got some of that meat. So
they did. Okay, good.
Yeah. So, but man, it was a great trip. There was, I think nine deer in our group. And then he had a second wave of like guys come in, and those guys put down like 22 deer, like crazy. Wow. And, there's still 39,990 whatever more deer left on Molokai for more people. So it's a fun experience, and I strongly recommend it to anybody listening.
Oh man, I got to get over there. It's been on my list for a long time, but yeah, no, it would have been good to get over there. I know we talked about it at some point about maybe trying to get over there, but at the time it was like too much. Well, not enough work going on.
Yeah.
I can't. It's always the way, right? I should have just been like, yeah, let's do it.
Yep. Yep. I actually signed up for it, and then I lost my job, and I was like, well, I'm going to go do this anyways. Like, I'm just going to make it work. And I'm glad I did. So
yeah, it's the way it goes. Yeah. And then you got a great experience and learned a ton as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also there must have been a nice moment. You saying like, you're into your, like, I don't know what, 8th, 9th, 10th year of hunting, and you're learning stuff, and now you're going out with people and you're the more experienced one, and you're like teaching some things that you've learned along the way. It's got to be a nice moment, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tell them what I can, and I also throw that caveat in of like, hey, I'm teaching myself. So if this is completely wrong, my bad, but this is what from my experiences, right? But yeah, it is nice to go out with other guys that I do have more experience than, and try and help them. Because I've said this on my podcast a bunch, but like, I know I'm not going to be the world's best hunter, but I want to be a good enough hunter that I can teach my son to be or my daughter to be a damn fine hunter. And so that's kind of where my goal is to like learn enough to pass it along so that I can sharpen their learning curve,
Yeah. I think it's also a nice thing, is right? Like, people put the time in to help you in some capacity. I mean, sometimes we learn a lot ourselves as well, but actually, I mean, all right, we should probably wind up soon.
Yeah.
But it reminds me, I took a friend who was a new hunter out last year, and I managed to help him get in on a buck as well. Yeah. And that's a nice moment, right? Like we kind of had him at one spot, he was sitting for a while, and then I kind of just had a feeling like, I'm just going to go check out the other spot. I'm just going to go for a little walk, and saw three bucks. Oh no, actually, maybe it was just one actually this time. I'm getting my stories mixed up, but there was just one there. Yeah. And at that point he had I think he has some radio, so he had a radio, and I was just like, called him on the radio. I was like, hey dude, I'm looking at a buck right now, and I think I could probably get within bow range. So if you could like run over here and walk, then you could shoot it, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he got over quickly and managed to take the shot. And it was actually, he took his first animal with a rifle as well. That was like his first big game animal, full stop. It ended up rolling into the bushes, and it was late dark again. But we kind of had this moment where I haven't actually told this story. We were like followed into where we thought it was, and we get to the spot where we're at the bushes, and there's just a pair of eyes looking at us.
You've been there. Okay.
There's just a pair of eyes looking at us in this bush. And I mean, if you go back to the episode that we recorded together on your podcast, like, I had a few encounters with bears and lions and all kinds of things where my first instinct isn't necessarily like, oh, this is just the animal that we shot is still alive. Like, yeah, it's like there's maybe a predatory animal on this thing right now. But for whatever reason, we got a bit closer and kind of figured, I don't know, I had a feeling like it was a deer, but I was like, in South Africa, I don't know why, but it's like a bit of a thing which I've kind of learned is that tradition, it's not tradition, but it's like bullets are super expensive in South Africa.
Okay.
So like you're going to go finish this thing off with a bullet in the head. They're like, no. What are you doing here? Use a knife. And you're like, okay. So I kind of had that moment with my buddy where he's like, oh, here, he hands me like a 7mm. And I'm like, we're like 10 yards away from this thing. You're going to make a massive hole in this guy. So I was like, no, I'll just go in with my knife. It'll be fine. Little did I know the shot was not quite as well placed as we thought, and the thing had a lot more life in it. So there's like, he actually took a video of this thing, which will never see the light of day, but you just see my hand reaching and grabbing a pair of antlers, and suddenly I'm just like on a bucking bronco deer for a second, furiously trying to resolve this situation as quickly as possible. But yeah, that was an intense moment, man. Man,
it's funny. So Bert Soren, his episode, I don't know if you listened to it, but he has a friend who went out to get a deer that he thought was expired, but he didn't have a knife. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have anything. So he basically, I mean, I recommend everyone listen to Bert's episode because it's one of my favorites. But this gentleman basically goes, he's like, well, the humane thing to do is to put this animal down. I don't have any weapons. So he grabs it. And if you know Bert's like, he owns a weightlifting equipment company. So like great shape. People he hangs out with, great shape. This guy basically headlocks the deer and sleeper chokes it to death.
No way.
And he's like, you do it with one arm, and with the other arm, he's like trying to pack its nose with dirt so it can't breathe. He's trying to like put this thing out of its misery. But he's like rolling around with his deer and just like smothers it to death, which is absolutely crazy. And then I don't know if you know this, I was just thinking about your story with the knives. That's what they do in Hawaii. They have a lot of wild hogs there. So I've had multiple friends who've been on hunts. They chase the hogs, and then dogs basically get the hog,
like bay it,
knock it up, and then you show up and you just basically finish it off. Like no weapons involved other than a knife and some dogs, which is a crazy, I mean, something I'd like to experience. I don't know how I'd feel about it in the moment, but man, it's crazy to think that that's just what people do.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things, right, where bow hunting is one thing. Like it's a super intense experience because you're so close and you have a much more like a better understanding of the animal, and that intensity of experience is very high. And then even more with a trad bow because you have to be even closer. And then, I mean, I guess like I can say with a knife, it's definitely an intense experience.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, yeah, but I can't imagine what it's like with the dogs barking and pigs. It would be definitely something I'd be up for experiencing at some point.
Yeah, it's on my list. It's not at the top, but it's on there.
Yeah.
Well, Robin, man, this was fun. We've gone long. Weird, right?
Who would have thought? But thanks, dude. Thanks for making the time. It was amazing. It was really nice. The man who is the one who's normally in this seat asking all the questions and hearing the stories from people, it was nice to flip it around and pod and poke you and hear all the stories from you. So
there we go, man. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. We'll both be releasing this. I think that we're gonna have another episode coming up soon, Robin, if you can make it out to Colorado to moose hunt with me. I think that would be a fun experience. Maybe we could do one live in the camper. So man, thank you.
I'd be well up for that, man.
This was a lot of fun. So thank you for taking the time, and thanks for starting your podcast. It's a lot of fun. And I've told you this before, you got the best intro in all podcasts. That is the bugs, and it just makes me shiver thinking about your intro. And it's a great start to something that you put together.
Oh, thanks very much, dude. It was, I think I spent far too much time thinking about what the intro should be. I should have just got on with the podcast at the beginning. But yeah, it's nice for you to say that. And I mean, I really enjoy hearing all the hunting stories as well, man. So should we do like a little thingy if we're going to do these out for everyone, or maybe we'll do our own intro outros? But I guess it's like, how can people find you on the Hunting Stories podcast? What's the best places to go?
Yeah, Instagram is best. It's just Hunting Stories _official on Instagram. What about you? What's your best one?
Obviously, the Wild Dispatch podcast. Actually, just the name is the Wild Dispatch. But if you go on Instagram, it's the Wild Dispatch. YouTube, the Wild Dispatch. TikTok, all of them. It's all the same. Cool. No underscores, nothing. So yeah, that's the name. Pretty easy to find. I mean, admittedly, some of those channels are a bit more threadbare than others, but Instagram's the main one.
Yep, same. Cool, man. Well, yeah, I'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes. I'm sure you'll do the same. But yeah, this was fun. Yeah. Can't wait till we get to do it again, man.
Great. Thanks very much.
Of course.
Right. That's it, folks. That's a wrap. That's another episode in the bag. Or the game bag, I should say. Giving a nod to the Hunting Stories vibe for the day. Thanks again to Michael for jumping on this double release episode. And thanks to everyone who's still listening. If you made it this far, great job. If you could just go one step further and hit the follow button, both on Michael and my own podcast, then that would make our collaborative days. You can find both myself and Michael on the socials. You just need to go to the show notes. I'm trying to remember the word. Yeah, it's the show notes. We're going to have a bunch of links down in the show notes. Check it all out. Like, share, subscribe, and all that lovely stuff. That's all for now. Thanks everyone for listening. And I'm going to wrap up by saying, if it feels wild, get out there and get after it. And make some stories. Bit of a mishmash there. Alrighty. Thanks everyone.